Chapter 542. The singing in the hall suddenly became continuous and long, and the trumpet-shaped instruments spat out a sacred hymn. When the students heard the familiar voice, they subconsciously raised their heads to look at the stage. As if waiting for this moment, the velvet-soft and silky black curtain slowly parted under everyone's gaze. The most beautiful and noble lady of the Shangmalian Academy, Principal Cynthia St. A. stepped onto the stage from behind the parted curtain. The 9 fairies around her flew forward, transforming into flowers and fireflies, rendering the whole stage dreamy and beautiful. Thousands of candles floating in the air followed the melody of the singing, rising and falling like the tide. The candlelight shone on the golden plate and the silver goblet, refracting the colorful light, making it look like a dream. "Welcome to the Shangmalian Academy." The words of welcome repeated countless times, making every senior feel as if they had returned to the beginning of the school. The senior students were immersed in their memories, and the freshmen were full of joy and anxiety. Victoria and Phoenix stood in front of the freshmen, their eyes full of excitement and curiosity. 1 second to remember https://m. Vipkanshu. VIP. They were like cats mixed in with a group of tiger cubs. They had the same body shape and stripes, but they were completely different individuals in terms of essence. Fortunately, they had never felt inferior about their identity as magical fairies, so naturally, they were not afraid of being exposed. "Hey, do you still remember us?" A voice suddenly came from behind her ear, startling Victoria. She turned around abruptly and saw the twins in snow-white dresses staring at her and Phoenix with their big round eyes. Victoria immediately stared at them with her eyes wide open, but she could not remember who they were even after racking her brain. "It's the princesses," Phoenix whispered in Victoria's ear. Victoria was reminded that she had seen them at Dake's birthday party. Then she smiled shyly and said, "Are you also freshmen this year?" "Of course." Anna, who was in front of the line, said proudly, "When the ceremony is over, we will be classmates." And she rolled her eyes and asked, "How about it? Which academy do you want to be assigned to?" Victoria scratched her head and said, "Although I want to enter the Aristocrats' Academy, it's still the Knights' Academy." There was a high chance that Phoenix would be assigned to the Knights' Academy. Of course, she wanted to go with her. And she asked in surprise, "Why the Knight Academy? I've heard that the people from the Knights Institute are all muscles. Smart people like us should go to the Magic Institute." Anna immediately seized the opportunity and mocked, "You want to enter the Magic Academy? Just obediently stay in the aristocratic compound with your sister. Don't worry, Father's request will be fulfilled by me as the older sister. As the younger sister, you only need to lie down and be on equal footing. When the time comes, I will feed you." "Ah, you stepped on me." And Chi raised his eyebrows and looked away, pretending that he had done nothing. But how could she get away with such an act? Anna instantly lifted her foot and stomped on the floor with a thud. In particular, the crisp sound of the stomping instantly attracted Professor Shi Erfu's attention. Professor Shi Erfu suddenly turned his head. His cold face and stern gaze shocked the whispering children into silence. "I know that everyone has been looking forward to the assignment ceremony for a long time. Now, let's end the topic. Now, let's welcome the first new student whose name is called to the stage." Principal Aerti could always end the topic before the students got bored. She smiled and lifted her wand. With a light tap, a simple scroll rolled into a cylinder appeared out of thin air. The scroll hung in the air and unfolded automatically. The names of the new students were densely written on it. Principal Aerti lifted her wand and tapped lightly again. A gap appeared in the middle of the scroll. The gap quickly squirmed and turned into a mouth. Then, an extremely sharp voice came out of the mouth. "Hana Ibwa. It's my turn. It's my turn. It's calling me." Among the new students, a little girl with a rosy complexion and 2 flaxen braids looked around in panic, as if confirming that there was no one with the same name. "Hana Ibwa. I'm coming, I'm coming." Hannah was shocked. She hurriedly ran out of the line and ran onto the stage while holding her skirt. Principal Aerti saw the little girl's nervousness. She gently tapped on the red shoes on her feet and enchanted them. Then, with every step she took, a glowing butterfly would fly out from the bottom of her feet. After a few steps, she was already surrounded by butterflies. Hannah's eyes widened. She reached out to touch the beautiful butterflies. The cold feeling in her hand made her quickly calm down. Ibwa, come here. Principal Aertii waved at her with a gentle gaze. Hannah stood beside her. Her back was straight and her hands were tightly pressed against the sides of her legs. Principal Aertii smiled and asked, "Do you know which 4 academies are in the academy?" Hannah nodded vigorously. "Yes." Principal Aertii said, "Say what you know out loud. You are very brave." "Yes." Hannah squeezed out the volume of her voice. She felt that she had never been so brave before. There are 4 academies in the academy. They are the Academy of Nobles, the Academy of Knights, the Academy of Magicians, and the Academy of Fools. The symbol of nobility is the noble crown. Only students with pure noble blood can be assigned to the Academy of Nobles. The symbol of the Academy of Knights is the knight's spear. Students who are assigned to the Academy of Knights have a brave heart. The symbol of the Academy of Magicians is the grimoire that records knowledge. Only students with a strong thirst for knowledge can be favored by the Academy of Magicians. The symbol of the Academy of Fools is the tarot card. Students who are assigned to the Academy of Fools are untapped gems. They have the greatest potential. Hannah said everything she knew in one breath at a speed she had never done before. Principal Aertii showed a look of approval. "Well said. The Academy of Knights and the Academy of Magicians are very suitable for you." Is it? Hannah was very happy. "Of course." Principal Aertii clapped her hands. One of the 9 fairies around her flew towards Hannah. Hannah took a magic card from the elf's claw and flipped it over. She noticed that the back of the card had a crown, a lance, a grimoire, and a tarot card, the Fool, drawn on it. Principal Aertii said, "I believe that you already know how to activate the Academy card?" Hannah nodded slightly. Following what she knew, she placed the Academy card in the palm of her left hand and covered it with her right hand. She closed her eyes and tried her best to inject her thoughts into the card. The half-finished Academy card absorbed the magic of her thoughts and gradually glowed. By the time Hannah opened her eyes, the branch card had already been automatically replenished. On the surface of the Academy card, the black grimoire that represented the Academy of Magicians appeared. Hannah Ibwa, Academy of Magicians. Oh! Hannah's bravery and wisdom left a very good impression on the 2nd to 6th grade students. The Academy of Magicians and the Academy of Knights were very welcoming towards her. When the Academy card was filled up, fireworks were automatically released from the card and condensed into the shape of a grimoire in the air. The students of the Academy of Magicians immediately cheered. The entire Academy card ceremony started with this and quickly and orderly proceeded. The atmosphere of the scene gradually increased. Every new student with potential that joined would cause a wave of cheers. The empty seats at the end of the 4 long tables also gradually decreased. Phoenix dimming. Finally, the Phoenix's name was spat out from the scroll. Finally, it's her turn. Dake immediately became spirited. The appearance of a familiar surname also caused the 2nd to 6th grade students to cry out in surprise. Only a very small number of people knew that John and Joey of the Dimming family had received an invitation from the Academy, so they weren't that surprised. Wait, it wasn't John and Joey? Because of this, the more shocked the students couldn't help but widen their eyes. Then, they saw a girl with long red hair step onto the stage. She clearly had flame-like hair, but Phoenix Diming's face was cold and she exuded an unapproachable aura. When she took an Academy card from the elf's beak, she immediately injected magic into it and smoothly activated the internal circuits of the Academy card. Immediately after, the Academy card was automatically replenished, and a lance naturally appeared on the surface of the card. Phoenix Dimming, Academy of Knights. Before the students could start a heated discussion, Phoenix had already stepped down from the stage. Then, under the guidance of the Academy of Knights, she walked towards the long table belonging to the Academy of Knights. Almost as soon as she appeared at the front of the long table, the Academy of Knights area suddenly burst into applause. Everyone knew that the Dimming family was at the peak of the kingdom, and students with the surname Dimming should be assigned to the Academy of Nobles no matter what. This unexpected result made the Academy of Knights very excited. As soon as Phoenix sat down, the surrounding students were very enthusiastic to talk to her. The second-grade students who were closest to the first grade frequently turned their heads to look at her, full of curiosity. But Phoenix didn't seem to want to talk to them. Dake looked at Phoenix's back with some worry. He had a feeling that her interpersonal relationships would become a mess. I can only hope that Victoria will also be assigned to the Academy of Knights. When Victoria's name was mentioned, Victoria's name was called out loudly. The students who were surprised by Phoenix's surname were now even more surprised. Including the Chown siblings who have yet to appear, the Dimming family this time has 4 new students. This shocking fact made it impossible for people to ignore. Since last year, Dake Dimming had dominated the first grade. The students of the Shang Malian Academy clearly knew the weight of the word dimming. If these 4 new students were allowed to grow, the entire first grade, no, perhaps the entire academy would be Dimming's world. Diamond, what exactly are you planning? Amidst many guesses and surprises, the vampire's daughter trotted onto the stage. Unlike her carefree appearance, she was somewhat nervous. When she stepped onto the stage, her calves were slightly trembling. Victoria Dimming? Ah. Under Principal A. Urtiai's gentle reminder, Victoria let out a small cry of surprise. Only then did she take the school card from the Griffin Fairy's beak. As the Dake Dimming's magic fairy, it was too easy to just inject magic. She had repeatedly heard Dake talk about the specific details of the school allocation ceremony. At this time, she hurriedly closed her eyes and poured her thoughts into the magic with all her might. The school card gradually emitted a faint red halo of white light in the palm of her hand. Very quickly, the Academy card completed the final refinement on its own and was branded with her personal brand. Victoria hurriedly opened her eyes and looked at the school card. Which school will it be? Seeing that the final answer was about to be revealed, Dake couldn't help but feel nervous. The Academy of Knights was the best result. The Academy of Magic was also acceptable. But what if it was the Academy of Fools? Wouldn't that expose the fact that the vampire's daughter was a little idiot? While staring at the stage, Dake suddenly noticed that the white Gouda on the Academy of Knights table next to him was a little strange. But after just a glance, he quickly turned his gaze back and saw that the school card in the vampire's hand shot out fireworks. The dazzling fireworks bloomed in the air and showed the appearance of tarot cards. The Fool's Tarot cards, it's the Academy of Fools. Victoria's mood instantly fell to the bottom. Being in a different school from Phoenix made her feel lonely for a moment. And it's neither the Academy of Knights nor the Academy of Magic. Is it saying that I'm neither brave nor smart? Woo-woo. After receiving the result, Victoria subconsciously looked down the stage to find Dake's figure. Then, an unprecedentedly warm applause erupted from the Academy of Fools. Obviously, the students of the Academy of Fools were extremely surprised by the unexpected addition of this dimming. Amidst the cheers, the vampire's daughter suddenly felt that maybe entering the Academy of Fools was not a bad thing. She dizzily walked down the stage and immediately fell into the arms of the Academy of Fools. Not long after, the remaining 2 dimming were called out one after another. The results were always unexpected. The 3rd dimming to go up the stage was John Dimming. This cousin of Dake was like a beggar version of Dake. Perhaps his thoughts of escaping from Dake were successfully accepted by the school card. Not only was he not assigned to the Academy of Nobles, but he also could not be assigned to the Academy of Knights. In the end, he was assigned to the Academy of Magic. Being assigned to the Academy of Magic, which symbolized seeking knowledge, was not something unacceptable. Yes, yes. Yes, yes. John almost jumped to the Academy of Magic as if he was running in the sun. Joey Dimming, who went up the stage right after his twin brother's success, also tried his best to inject his thoughts of escaping from Dake into the school card along with his magic power. However, things did not always go according to plan. Perhaps she was not as smart as her twin brother. She was just assigned to the Academy of Nobles. At that moment, the Academy of Nobles, which finally got another dimming, set off a wave of cheers as if to express all the accumulated frustration from before. However, Joey herself was not happy at all. 2 in 1 4200 plus. Catgirl Encyclopedia should be added today. The wallpaper is in the full subscription group. You can use it for yourself, but don't spread it. Starting from tonight, there should be more time. The last 10 days of July, starting from 10,000. Chapter 543. With the arrival of the 4 dimming, the ceremony entered a period of stability. No one would have thought that the 4 dimming of the first grade would be assigned to 4 different departments. But this kind of behavior was really in the style of a certain dimming. The students of the 4 departments gradually quieted down. After Doc recovered from his shock, he began to ponder. The situation before him was completely out of his expectations. Now that Victoria and Phoenix were assigned to 2 different departments, and John and Joey were also assigned to 2 different departments, the situation couldn't be worse. The only one in the same department as him was Joey, his cousin whose name made him feel very uncomfortable. Of course, he didn't forget his promise to take care of the twins, but his cousin John wasn't in the noble house, which was really beyond his reach. John looked silly, but I didn't expect him to be a scholar. Dake knocked his head, feeling a little helpless. Website: https://m Vipcanshu. VIP. His impression of John and Joey was still the same as when they were young. At that time, John and Joey were still round and cute, and the 2 little cuties would take the initiative to grab his fingers when they were in a crowded place. They were simply too cute. But now, the 2 siblings were avoiding him like the plague, which made him feel very helpless. What a pity. What a pity. John was assigned to the sorcerer department. Dake shook his head again. Anna saw him sighing and whispered, "By the way, Dake, where is Aurora?" Dake said, "Aurora and Aunt Claire are together, they should be waiting in line now." Luosi curiously asked, "Aurora, is she Anna's cousin?" Dake nodded and said, "Yes." "I don't know where she will be assigned?" Needless to say, Anna held her head high and said, "Aurora will of course be assigned to the sorcerer department. She's so smart." Dake thought about it and agreed. Although she didn't have many opportunities to show off in the Duke's mansion, she still showed a very strong ability to absorb knowledge when she came into contact with armament refining. Dake wouldn't be surprised if she was assigned to the magic engineering department. In addition to Aurora, he was more concerned about Oscar Aud's sister. Where would Vivian Alvind, the dark elf, be assigned? Vivian, Victoria, and Phoenix were the trio that he had expected, but it was obviously impossible for them to form a team now. As for the 2 princesses, how could he be assigned outside of the House of Nobles? Dake kept glancing at Phoenix and Victoria until Enchi was called before Anna. He then turned to look at the stage. Almost at the same time, the palace that had just calmed down suddenly became noisy. The appearance of the princess was naturally the center of attention. Especially the students of the House of Nobles. They had been looking forward to the ceremony of the 2 princesses from the very beginning. Anna and Enchi not only had the noblest status, but they were also famous for their amazing magic talent. Last year, they had visited the academy on Halloween and left a very good impression on the students. If they could get the 2 princesses, it would be tantamount to getting the hero's son in last year's ceremony. Of course, now everyone knew that the Valkyrie's son was the biggest treasure last year. Now that the biggest treasure had been promoted to the 2nd grade, in the blink of an eye, it would become the biggest bargaining chip for the House of Nobles to compete for the school championship. This had already made the other 3 academies feel that the situation was very serious. Now that the House of Nobles was so powerful, if the 2 princesses were to join them, then the year after next, the year after next. It was simply unimaginable. Therefore, when the students of the House of Nobles were popping champagne in advance, the students of the other 3 academies were also staring at the stage, looking forward to a miracle like the 4 dimensions. Who said that the pure-blood nobles would definitely be assigned to the House of Nobles? Wasn't last year's White Gouda also a pure-blood noble? Wasn't this year's John Diming's bloodline also pure? When the characteristics required by the other academies overwhelmed the characteristics of the noble bloodline, even the kingdom's princess might fall to another family. And Chi, who had excitedly run onto the stage because she had won against her sister, didn't care about pouring a huge amount of magic power into the school card under the gazes of thousands of people. As the magic light shone brightly, the final steps of the school card were completed, and soon the symbol of the school was displayed. Boom! The fireworks shot out from the school card condensed in the air above the stage, and impressively, it was a golden crown. The crown that belongs to me. And Chi smiled and quickly walked down the stage, facing the almost fanatical cheers and shouts of the House of Nobles, as if she was a queen who was being worshipped by thousands of people. She quickly walked toward the end of the long table of the House of Nobles. Anna, who was a step slower, was gnashing her teeth in the group of new students. I should be the next one, right? Anna was angry in her heart and walked toward the stage. However, the name that came out of the scroll was Vivian Alvind. The gray-haired dark elf with wheat-colored skin walked past Anna with her long legs, leaving only a trace of fragrance. Anna was stunned for a moment, then she glared at the dark elf's back. She wasn't dissatisfied with the dark elf girl, but she vented her anger toward Chi on the dark elf. After a while, it disappeared. But Vivian Alvin's perception was very sharp, and she almost immediately turned to look at Anna. What are you looking at? Anna whispered with a pout. Vivian didn't cause trouble. She just shook her head slightly and continued to walk to the stage. Anna was stunned for a moment and suddenly felt hostile towards Vivian. She felt that she was being despised. When Vivian Alvin stepped onto the stage, the audience, which had just calmed down slightly because of the end of Chi's assignment, sounded again. Vivian, who had the iconic dark elf beauty, didn't hide her identity as a subhuman. Her face was cold, her eyes were dark, and she didn't smile. At least on the surface, she had the cunning and coldness unique to dark elves. In the eyes of the students below the stage, some were purely curious, and some were full of malice. Even in the Shang-Malian Academy, it was not uncommon for students to be unfriendly to subhumans. Not to mention that dark elves were subordinates of the demons. Vivian glanced at the audience and frowned slightly. But Principal A. Urtiai's impartial attitude gradually eased her expression. She had her own goals. On the road to achieving her goals, no matter how many people's gossip should not make her waver. Alvind, pour your thoughts into the branch card along with magic power, and the branch card will guide you. Surrounded by Principal A. Urtiai's gentleness, Vivian took the branch card and poured magic power into it. Poof! Should I say that the Shang-Malian Academy's branch card was really of good quality? Even if Vivian's magic power went out of control again, the branch card was not damaged at all. However, Principal A. Urtiai suppressed the magic power as soon as it exploded. In the end, Vivian successfully completed the final refinement of the branch card and activated the allocation system of the branch card. Bang! The fireworks rushed into the sky and quickly condensed into the shape of a magic book. Magic Academy. Dake couldn't help but open his mouth wide. He had to admit that Vivian Alvin's entrance test results were really good, but the three people in his mind parted ways before they were formed. It was really poisonous. It seems that this year's Magic Academy also has a good harvest. Dake finally shook his head and sighed, then continued to watch the branch ceremony. A few minutes later, second Princess Anna's name was finally called. She confidently walked onto the stage and poured magic power into the branch card as soon as she got it. In just a short moment, the branch card emitted a blazing white light. She looked provocatively at Vivian below the stage and immediately noticed that Chi was making a face at her. Damn it! Anna gritted her teeth, but her good upbringing allowed her to maintain the appearance of a princess in front of everyone. Of course, she was also undoubtedly assigned to the noble house. With the return of the two princesses one after another, the excitement of the noble house's students was overflowing. The talkers were loudly saying that this year's school championship competition was in the bag, and next year's school championship competition was even more secure. In such an atmosphere, Aurora Montefiore timidly walked onto the stage. She habitually lowered her head slightly and let her bangs cover her eyebrows, but her dreamy silver hair and exquisite face that was not inferior to the two princesses still attracted a lot of attention. Probably no one expected that there would be so many amazing new students this year. Whether it was the four dimming, the two princesses, the dark elf and the silver-haired girl of unknown origin, they all made people wonder how to evaluate them. The other three branches, who had lost the two princesses, immediately prayed for the silver-haired girl to join them. However, Aurora lightly pursed her thin lips. Even when she finished filling up the branch card, her gem-like eyes were still looking in the direction of Dake. Her goal, the branch that she wanted to go to, had always been only one. And the branch card actually responded to her expectations. When the golden crown jumped into the sky, Aurora's cheeks flushed, and she could not help but reveal a rare look of excitement. Wow! The students of the noble house stood up and cheered as if they were dancing. The waves of cheers were like the students who had been assigned to the noble house, each more dazzling than the last. But Aurora's excitement was even higher than theirs. At this time, she immediately ran off the stage and walked toward the end of the noble house's table. Being assigned to the noble house was completely out of Aurora's expectations. She was very clear that while she had half-human blood, she also had a quarter-giant blood and a quarter-moon elf blood. Under such circumstances, it was theoretically impossible to be assigned to the noble house. But facts spoke louder than words. Aurora almost jogged to Dake and stopped in front of him. Dake was also happy for her and said, "Welcome to the noble house." Aurora softly said, "Mm," and walked past him with her head lowered. She sat down next to the two little princesses. Then, without waiting for the students of the noble house to be too excited, the Orc Royal, who still had a large number of beast-like forms, strode onto the stage. As soon as he appeared, his imposing manner exploded in an instant. The students, who were originally shocked that an orc had entered, immediately realized that this orc's status was not trivial. Among the orcs, the behemoth was the true king. But under the behemoth, there were some lion men, tiger men, and so on who had the bloodline of the behemoth. They were also considered royalty that was higher than the commoners. Spike Leon was one of the Lion Man tribe. His physical characteristics were very obvious. He was more foreign than the dark elf girl. When he was on the stage, Spike Leon walked with a majestic gait. His eyes looked down at the audience, giving off a sense of examination. This was not annoying. Freshmen with a king's aura had always been very popular. Compared to the rejection of the subhumans, the welcome of the strong obviously had the upper hand. Only the subhumans who did not want to improve and were obsessed with their different identities would be hated by most people. As for the extreme racists, in such a big environment, they would also restrain themselves. Spike Leon, Academy of Knights. Spike Leon was finally assigned to the Knight Academy. In an instant, the little knights cheered wildly. The brave and majestic lion men simply hit the sweet spot of the Knight Academy students. They even welcomed Spike Leon more than the two princesses. Among the orcs, this Spike Leon should be considered a prince, right? White Gouda of the Knight Academy whispered to Luo Boat Broheim. But before Luo Boat could reply, Spike Leon's majestic voice was heard from behind the two of them, the 38th prince of the orcs. Then the footsteps gradually faded away. The 38th prince? White was shocked. Luo Boat was horrified. The orcs can really give birth. The 38th prince of the orcs, Spike Leon, who had already walked over, suddenly lost his footing and almost fell. After the orc prince's appearance, the academy assignment ceremony gradually came to an end. The number of freshmen who attracted attention this year was even more than last year. Just the ones that Dake was more familiar with were Academy of Aristocrats, Anna and Chi, Aurora, Joey Academy of Knights, Phoenix, Spike Academy of Magic, John, Vivian Academy of Fools, Victoria. Although the vampire's daughter was assigned to the Academy of Fools alone, she was still regarded as a treasure by the Academy of Fools and was extremely popular. Now, there was a slight feeling of indulging in pleasure. Dake secretly sighed in relief when he saw how smoothly she got along with the students around her. Among so many people, he was most worried about Victoria. In contrast, Phoenix's intelligence was born later than hers, but he matured faster than her. Until today, the vampire's daughter still had the strong aura of a child. He could only hope that she could better sharpen her mind in the Academy of Fools. After the last freshman accepted the Academy assignment ceremony, Principal Arti once again took the center position and used a few short words to lead the next routine, first seat speech. From the 2nd to the 6th grade, there were a total of 5 first seats in the academy. Dake Dim-eng was the first seat of the 2nd grade. He slightly adjusted his collar and walked onto the stage amidst thunderous applause. Now, let's welcome the first seat of the 2nd grade, Dake Dim-eng from the Noble Academy, to open the curtains of the first seat speech. Principal Arti stretched out his hand and said this, then retreated to the side. Dake walked to the position where she was standing before and looked at all the students with a calm expression. His gaze quickly swept across the venue. He could see Victoria pointing at him and shouting excitedly. Anna and Enchi pouted and looked irritated. Phoenix was still expressionless. Aurora's cheeks were slightly red and she looked up. Vivian looked surprised. John and Joey were as usual. In the 2nd grade, Dolan Teddy took the lead in applauding. Anna and Luo C also echoed. Saraswati, Emma Matisse, and the other top students were all unwilling to give up. But if one looked closely, they would find that their eyes were also brimming with confidence. Obviously, during the 3-month-long vacation, they did not relax too much. This point. It seemed to be the same for White Gouda. Even Luo Boat Brohim's energy was much higher than when he was in the 1st grade. His magical engineering skills might not have improved much. But his tan skin and more vigorous body indicated that he had received long-term military training. Perhaps, he had already opened 1 or 2 chakras. As for the students in the higher grades, Pan Duola Doragon, who was originally in the 4th grade and was now the 5th grade's first seat, was now preparing to give a speech behind the stage. And the current first seat of the 4th grade, the daughter of the Winter Sage, Winnie Scatty, was also preparing backstage. Dake's gaze swept across the rest of the people and quickly retracted his gaze. Then he finally said, "Good evening, all the freshmen of the 1st grade, the students of the 2nd grade, and the seniors of the 3rd grade and above. I am extremely honored to be able to stand on this stage as the first seat of the 2nd grade. During the last school year, we did not have an easy time. It was a very standard opening. Even Dake himself did not expect that he would be so formulaic when he opened his mouth. But he still followed the opening and continued to speak, giving off a feeling that he was very eloquent and incessant. A few minutes later, when Principal Arti's voice entered his ears, he stopped abruptly. He skipped over most of the content and gave a more standard ending. That's all for the gossip. I believe that although everyone is interested in a long and tedious speech, it can't compare to the romance of personally experiencing it. At the end of this speech, I will condense the reason why I was able to become the first seat into 3 words. I hope that the future generations can learn from it. These 3 words are temperance, the tower, and the world. Aren't these 3 tarot cards? After he finished speaking, Dake quickly left the stage under the slight confusion of the students below the stage. Principal Arti calmly changed the stage and invited the current first seat of the 3rd grade. Then it was the 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade. But no matter how wonderful the speech of the latecomer was, it could not compare to Dake's 3 words final conclusion. The more one thought about the 3 words he left behind, the more lingering the aftertaste. But when he casually said those 3 words, he probably did not think that they would lead to a long-lasting trend in Shang Malian Academy. The entire speech segment was shortened to a quarter of an hour under the control of Principal Arti behind the scenes. She finally took over the topic and gave her blessings to all the students present and made a beautiful vision. Then, as usual, she took out a magic card from the Gourmet series and activated it without leaving a trace. A tide of light surged out from the surface of the magic card and covered all the dining tables in the blink of an eye. When the light dissipated, the silver plates and bowls were already filled with countless delicious fragrances. The students were attracted by the delicious food and temporarily put aside their puzzled thoughts and quickly immersed themselves in the sea of delicious food. When you go back, don't forget to use the school card to check the school rules. Finally, I wish the new students that in the next 6 years, you can find your own value in Shang Malian Academy. Until the dinner came to an end, the whole school opening banquet finally came to an end under the constant reminder of Principal Arti. Then, the students of the 4 schools were led by the prefects to their respective towers. But when Dake saw Victoria and Phoenix gradually disappear from his sight, he suddenly felt a little uneasy. He stayed in the same place for a while before he continued to move forward under the urging of Anna. Usually, after the school opening banquet ended, there would be a second welcoming ceremony in each tower that was exclusive to the school. The seniors would hold a welcoming dinner for the juniors so that they could integrate into the group faster. Last year, Dake directly went back to the dorm and fell asleep, so he missed this event. This year, he was a sophomore, but he was not prepared to join in the fun. He needed time to get used to the feeling of not seeing Victoria and Phoenix in his sight. And tonight, he had to try to draw Great Sins for the first time after the Underworld Spirit spell was upgraded. After he said goodbye to Anna and Luo, he went into his bedroom and found a new set of daily necessities and textbooks for the second year on his desk. After asking the little devil, Dake found out that it suddenly appeared on the entrance, so he shook his head and took some time to clear his mind and draw Great Sins. On the first day of September, he aimed for Greed, which was 2 points higher than the target. The result was very satisfying. After using the Underworld Spirit spell, the greed that overflowed from his head was successfully condensed to 2 points per drop. In this way, his monthly drawing quota would increase, which would be more helpful for his experiments. And with the increase in his monthly drawing quota, he would be able to develop new Great Sins more boldly. After he took a bath, he sat down in front of his desk and prepared to have a general understanding of the textbooks for the second year before he went to bed. As expected, there is no textbook for arithmetic. After a while, he stacked the textbooks neatly and looked out of the window. In less than a few seconds, his premonition was confirmed. A small dragonfly flew through the window guardrail and into the room. Then, it suddenly glowed and turned into a little fairy with a pair of dragonfly wings. Li has arrived. Oh. 3 in 1 6000 plus. 0157/233 Zhengzhou flood. Hope the rescuers and the trapped people are safe. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Chapter 544. Wah. Lily Laplace ignored the sharp gazes of the elves and pushed Dake to the ground, almost riding on his face. Dake helplessly lifted up the elves and got up. Why are you only here now? Aren't we preparing for the sorting ceremony? Lily stuck out her tongue and glanced at the desk full of textbooks. Dake said, You're only here now. Is one day enough? Lily floated in the air, patted him on the shoulder like a little adult, and said, Oh, Diamond, you have to believe in Professor Bacon. Sacrifice to Professor Bacon, who was about to go to heaven. Dake rolled his eyes and took out the Mathematics 2 book that he spent a lot of effort to write. He threw it at Lily. Pa. Lily clapped her hands and caught the Mathematics 2 book. She then excitedly flipped through the book to read it. As promised, Dake only wrote the main content. As for the polishing part and the supporting exercises, Lily and Professor Bacon had to complete them. Remember the website, Vipcanshu. 6 originally, if Lily and Professor Bacon wanted to use Mathematics 2 as a second-grade textbook, they first had to master the content. The polishing and writing exercises were just along the way. Of course, Lily made it clear that she wanted to push all the trouble to Professor Bacon. However, this had nothing to do with Dake. I'll give you the money and you give me the goods. After Lily quickly flipped through the book, Dake waved his school card in front of her. Lily gave him a flirtatious look and laughed. A priest can leave, but he can't leave the church. Don't worry, I won't go back on my word. Then, she took out her school card and pressed it against Dake's. Beep, the sound of a transfer notification rang out, and Doc's school card had an additional 50,000 credits. Doc's face lit up when he saw that his wallet was full again. However, he didn't forget that the agreed-upon credit limit was actually 100,000 credits. What about the other 50,000? Dake asked coldly as he flicked his school card. Hee. Lily tilted her head and tried to muddle through with her cuteness. However, how could Dake Dimming be so easily fooled? Seeing him crossing his arms and sneering, Lily suddenly turned around and flapped his wings in an attempt to escape. However, Dake merely lifted her chin slightly, and the little devil beast and the Delu beast both blocked her way. Lily rolled his eyes and quickly said, "The other half is Professor Bacon's, not Lily's. I'll introduce Professor Bacon to you tomorrow, and you can ask her for it yourself." Dake's heart skipped a beat, and he said, "So, you didn't actually reach an agreement with Professor Bacon?" Lily's expression froze. He whistled and looked up. Looking at her face, she probably didn't even mention it, let alone talk about cooperation. However, 50,000 credits was indeed not a small amount. Very few professors would consider giving such a large amount of credits to their students. However, if Professor Bacon saw the value of mathematics too, not to mention 50,000 credits, she might even take out 500,000 credits. Then let's wait until the textbook is printed, and find a chance to have a cup of tea. Doc deliberated over his offer. "Okay, it's a deal." Lily suddenly turned around and looked as if she had succeeded in her evil scheme. Dake suddenly remembered that Lily had the idea of inviting him to a mathematics tea party a long time ago. He suddenly became silent. Due to the lack of time, Lily didn't stay in Dake's dormitory for too long. After she left with Mathematics 2, Dake smiled. These 50,000 credits were just right for the construction of the Magical Animal Society. Unlike other people, he received a special promise from the principal of a RTI at the end of last semester. He could ignore the rules and directly apply for a classroom. He could restart the Magical Animal Society at the beginning of the semester. This meant that he could start recruiting members on the first weekend of the new semester, just like the other societies. This was very important for a new society. If any society wanted to develop, it was essential to have talented people. Also, the minimum number of people needed to maintain a society was 5. Dake made a simple plan in front of his desk. He then took a shower and changed his clothes. He was ready to go to bed. Tomorrow was Sunday. The students would have a whole day of buffer time before school officially started. He could use this time to build the Magical Animal Society. The weather was great tonight. Dake changed into his pajamas, yawned, and was about to crawl under his blanket. However, just as he lifted the blanket, there were 3 long knocks and 1 short knock on the door. Of course, Dake didn't set up this kind of signal. The person was probably used to it. "It's so late, who could it be?" Dake thought in annoyance. Under his signal, the little devil beast flew from the bird's stand to the door. Soon, it opened the door. Suddenly, a fresh fruity aroma filled the room, refreshing the mind. Dake's expression relaxed. He asked, "Is it Aurora?" "Yeah." Aurora squeezed out a voice. "Good evening, Dake." "Good evening." Dake gave up on the idea of crawling under his blanket and walked towards the entrance. They met at the entrance. Aurora was holding a silver basin that was bigger than her. There was a transparent lid on top of the silver basin. Through the lid, one could see the slightly viscous liquid and a large amount of fruit pulp in the basin. It emitted a cold smell. Iced fruit soup. Aurora saw that he noticed and said softly, "Sister Olga asked me to prepare supper for you guys every night. Luckily, I was assigned to the noble house. Otherwise, I might not even be able to enter the tower." Supper every night? Dake seemed to see gluttony leaving him in the dust. He quickly said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. If you want supper, I usually ask the little devil beast to bring something back from the cafeteria. You just entered the school. You can't delay your studies because of this. By the way, if there's anything you don't understand or inconvenient, you can come to me directly. I'm usually not in the dormitory. I'm in the library." Aurora said shyly, "It's just a little food. It won't take too much time." Dake had been with her for a long time. He knew that although she looked soft and weak, she was actually a stubborn person. He couldn't help but shake his head. He took the silver basin and asked, "Where did you make this?" I borrowed the kitchen from the cafeteria, Aurora said softly. The halfling ants are like you said. They're very gentle and kind. When I have credits, I'll buy a set of cooking equipment from the dormitory balcony. Dake nodded and said, Study hard. You won't have to worry about credits. As he said that, he put the silver basin on the table and took out small silver bowls from the cupboard. He called the magic elves to help wash them. One bowl after another, the fruit soup was quickly divided up. After pouring the last bit into his bowl, Dake picked up the spoon and tasted it. As soon as the fruit soup entered his mouth, a chill exploded in his mouth, penetrating his heart and lungs. Is this peppermint? Dake asked. Aurora shook her head and said, It's a similar ingredient. It's lighter than peppermint. Dake tasted it carefully and found that it was indeed so. The sweetness of the fruit and the peppermint-like coolness blended perfectly, especially the taste after chilling it. He couldn't stop praising it. Dake exclaimed, I've always heard that your cooking skills are good, but I didn't expect it to be so good. Aurora lowered her head, her neck and ears gradually turning red. It's not that good. While tasting the fruit soup, Dake asked Aurora about the first year's class schedule. He found that it wasn't too different from his first year. The only thing that surprised him was that the original arithmetic class had been changed to mathematics. Professor Bacon was in the second year last year, so he should be in the third year now. So who's the first year's arithmetic professor? And who stole my teaching materials and didn't pay the copyright fee? Dake felt that he had to find out. After finishing the large basin of fruit soup, Aurora left Dake's dorm with satisfaction. She walked downstairs and hummed softly. She only felt that her whole body was light and graceful. This was the feeling. This was the feeling she wanted. When she was at the Duke's mansion, Aurora took care of her so well that she didn't have any room to show off. Now that she was at school, she could finally show off her skills. What should I do tomorrow night? She smiled sweetly. Sleeping after a meal wasn't a good habit. Dake walked to the balcony and looked in the direction of the Tower of the Fool's Yard. He sighed in his heart. Then he practiced the underworld magic for half an hour before he went back to sleep. A rainstorm at night made the air in the castle very fresh. The freshmen spent their first night at the Shangmalian Academy in the midst of the sudden rain. Some were hesitant, some were excited, and some didn't feel anything at all. The vampire's daughter hugged her knees and sat on the bed. The bed she tried hard to make was still a little crooked, and the pillow under her chin didn't have a pillowcase. The whole dorm was spacious and empty. It made her, who had lived in groups since she was born, very uncomfortable. A sense of loneliness arose. But she clenched her teeth and endured it. Not being assigned to the knight's yard made her very unhappy. She didn't think that she lacked courage. I must show them that I'm also very brave. Sob, 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 Dake. It was a coincidence. The Phoenix girl in the tower of the knight's yard didn't fall asleep either. She moved the bed to the corner and curled up her petite body in a dark corner. She was wrapped in a quilt and pursed her lips as she thought. The following academic life would be a challenge for her. In contrast, the two little princesses were sleeping soundly without a care in the world. It was the first time the two of them slept in a place where no one was accompanying them. Their rude and overbearing sleeping posture was finally exposed. They even slept in the same position, like tortoises being roasted on a fire. On the morning of September 2nd, most people chose to sleep until late in the morning. But Dake wasn't one of them. He had gotten used to the pace of life at the academy again. He left the dorm at 8 o'clock in the morning, feeling refreshed. Although the principal of ARTI had opened a back door, simplifying the process of establishing a club and even eliminating the most important review process, the necessary procedures still had to be followed. Dake arrived at Professor Shi Erfu's office and found that someone was already inside. So he knocked on the office door. Knock, knock, knock. Come in. The door wasn't locked from the inside. Dake turned the doorknob and entered. Dake. Professor Shi Erfu raised her head a little, somewhat puzzled. Good morning, Professor. Dake raised his hand to his chest and bowed slightly. Then he let go and said, Professor, I want to establish a club. Professor Shi Erfu suddenly remembered. She smiled and said, "Is it the Magical Animals Club?" A smile appeared on Dark's face as he nodded, "Yes." Professor Shi Erfu's eyes showed traces of reminiscence. She said with a smile, "I didn't expect to see the emergence of this club one day. I think I told you everything at the end of the last semester. But now that 3 months have passed, your memory is probably fading. Wait a moment, I'll prepare a document for you." "Thank you, Professor Shi Erfu." Dake walked to the sofa and sat down, minding his own business as he boiled water and made tea. After pouring a cup of tea for Professor Shi Erfu, he finally received a document. The document wasn't thick, so he finished reading it quickly. Basically, it wrote the rules and precautions for establishing a club. Although he could take shortcuts, he should know some of the complicated procedures. Professor Shi Erfu said, "The Magical Animals Club is a very special club because magical animals is a very broad concept. The club's contact with magical animals doesn't stop at the level of research. In fact, raising magical animals is the club's biggest feature. A club like this that brings chaos to the school should have been banned." Dake. "But it didn't." Professor Shi Erfu nodded and said, "Yes. Because the original founders of the club had the special ability to tame and manage magical animals, and the members who came after them were very responsible. They wouldn't ignore the magical animals. Even if an accident happened, they would deal with it immediately. In other words, they gained the trust of the school." Dake couldn't help but think. Indeed, there are many types of magical animals with different characteristics. If you don't have the ability to tame and manage magical animals, it will only bring chaos. "Professor, can I let Professor Nini be the club's instructor? I think with her ability, she will definitely be able to tame the magical animals properly." "Isn't it Li Li?" Professor Shi Erfu asked in surprise. Oh hee hee." Dake's eyes wandered, then he sighed and said, "Then it will be Li Li." Professor Shi Erfu saw the change in his expression and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Li Li will be sad if she sees you like this." Dake waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, she must be busy right now." Wah wah wah. However, the sudden sound made Dake's expression change slightly. Li Li, half of her body came out from the ceiling and went into the room. She raised her eyebrows at Dake and pouted. It was a look that said, "If you don't comfort me, I will cry in front of you." 2-in-1 4,000 plus. It's accumulating power, it's accumulating power. Today, I will send the culprit who disturbed my retreat to the train. Chapter 545. As soon as he saw Li Li, Dake knew that she must have pushed all the teaching materials to Professor Bacon. Of course, he wouldn't coax a bad kid like her. Therefore he ignored her and continued to speak to Professor Shi Erfu. "Then we'll choose Li Li as the club's instructor. What's the next step?" Li Li shouted, "Wait, you haven't asked for my opinion." Professor Shi Erfu turned to her and smiled. "Then, do you object?" Li Li immediately held her head high and said, "Who else but me?" Dake subconsciously glanced at her swollen chest and heard Professor Shi Erfu continue, "Since you don't object, then there's nothing for you to do for now. Come and sign an autograph later." Li Li's mood quickly improved and she happily floated to the sofa where Dake was sitting. Shang Molian Academy had a large number of clubs. Other than a few large clubs, there were also a large number of small clubs. Each club had a different theme. Even so, the Magical Zoology Society was extremely special among them. For the little fairy, there was no other club that she was more interested in. Remember, https://m Vipkanchu. VIP little fairies were similar to but different from elves who were naturally close to plants. They were more fond of animals and could talk to animals. They were good helpers in taming and managing magical animals. If she didn't have the ability, Principal Aerti wouldn't have recommended her to be the Magical Zoology Society's instructor. Dake made a cup of black tea for Li Li and saw Professor Shi Erfu take out a stack of forms from the drawer. He then took one out and gently pushed it. The form floated in front of him as if it had grown wings. He picked it up and muttered, is this a club application form? Professor Shi Erfu smiled. Yes, fill this out first. It seemed that even if he went through the back door, he still had to go through the procedures. Dake picked up a pen and filled in the club application form. First, he filled in the applicant's name, year, college. Then, there was the name of the club and the name of the club's instructor. Finally, there was the research topic of the club and the reason for applying. The research topic of a society was the core that differentiated a society from other societies. For example, the Aristocratic History Research Society, which Dake had been in contact with the most, had an official title of researching the history of the aristocrats. Every semester, they had to submit research reports related to the history of the aristocrats. If the research report was not approved, the society would be punished or disbanded. Therefore, if the society wanted to survive, it had to do real research. If he were to simply make up a name, he would not be able to live for long. Of course, the Academy would generally rate the societies based on the number of members, scale, funds, and other factors. Societies with low ratings would have lower requirements for the quality of their research reports. Correspondingly, a club with a high rating would also have to provide high-quality research reports and even more results. That was why large societies would actively seek for talents to contribute to the society's development. Fortunately, Dake had never thought of making the magical animal society big or strong. His original goal was only to provide a place for the magic elves to move around outside of the dormitory. Now that Paradise had been upgraded, if the society's classroom could be located at a ventilated high place, the fragrance of the healing flower would spread to more than half of the academy. The magic elves would also be able to move around at an epic level. Therefore, the location of the society's classroom had been chosen with great importance. Dake twirled his pen and temporarily moved his thoughts away, continuing to fill in the form. The research topic of the society is naturally the research of magical animals. As for the reason for applying, Dake wrote on the form, after learning about Grand Magus Peter's deeds in the history of magic class, I couldn't help but yearn for it. I wanted to follow in his footsteps and rebuild the magical animal society, to come into contact with and understand those magical animals. 5 minutes later, Dake filled up the form and handed it to Professor Shi Erfu. Professor Shi Erfu took the form and carefully looked it over, reminding them, "You forgot to sign it." Thus, Dake and Li signed their names on the form. Professor Shi Erfu confirmed that there were no mistakes, then wrote his name on the approver and stamped it. "It's done." Then, she took out a magic card that was very similar to the branch card from the drawer. With a flick of her finger, it fell into Dake's hand. Dake asked curiously, "What is this?" "I know." Li immediately raised her hand. "A society card." Professor Shi Erfu glared at her and said, "This is a society card. It's the same type as the branch card, and its basic functions are not much different. After the last step is completed, you can even summon a familiar exclusive to the society. When you successfully establish the society, you can use this society card to store the society's funds, credits, and use this society card to receive notifications about the society from the academy." After listening carefully, Dake asked doubtfully, "There's no function to send out notifications to the members of the society?" Professor Shi Erfu paused for a moment, then understood what he meant. "Not yet. But after the experience of refining the secret passage pass, we're preparing to add a similar function to the society card. Of course, the final product will definitely have limited functions. For example, we can only send out 3 notifications to the members of the society each week." "That's really good news." Dake smiled. After the notification function was added, the practicality of this society card would greatly increase. Moreover, he was very interested in the familiar that could be summoned by the society card. But now was not the time to think about this. He asked, "Then, can I go through with the certification now?" "Not yet." Professor Shi Erfu shook his head. "You need to confirm a classroom as the society base first." Then, she pushed her chair away and stood up. "I think you've already chosen a classroom for the society, right?" Dake nodded. "Of course." Professor Shi Erfu smiled. "Lead the way." Dake, Which floor of the castle will our society classroom be on? Dake, I think the 8th floor is good. What do you think? Dake. Dake smiled and raised his hand, using his palm to support Professor Li Li's side profile. The castle of the Shangmalian Academy didn't have many things, but it had a lot of classrooms. Even if all the classrooms of the academy and the society were added together, less than 1/10 of the total number of classrooms were used. Dake had noticed this during the Halloween event. At that time, he was very confused about the purpose of these classrooms. Now that he had to choose between these classrooms, his answer was, none of them. Dake, why did you walk out of the castle? Okay, quiet down. Dake couldn't help but put his hand on his forehead. Professor Shi Erfu looked at the golden-haired young master who was being pestered by the little minx. Her serious face relaxed, and a smile like a spring breeze appeared on her face. Then she guessed, I think Dake wants to choose a classroom on the spiral clock tower, right? Dake turned his head and said, Can I? Professor Shi Erfu stopped smiling and said with a straight face, There's no precedent. Dake immediately said, Then it's okay. Professor Shi Erfu was surprised. What kind of logic is that? Dake said, Isn't precedent used to create precedent? Professor Shi Erfu shook his head. The headmaster of ARTI specially told me that your application for the society was part of the reward for the last academic year. Otherwise, I wouldn't have arranged for your society classroom on the clock tower. Doc shrugged his shoulders. Then help me say thank you to the principal. By the way, are there any classrooms on the spiral clock tower that I can't choose? Professor Shi Erfu said, Currently, only the 12th floor is reserved for astronomy classes. Other professors also choose the 12th floor for their astronomy, astrology, and other elective courses. As a society, you need to keep a distance from the classrooms. Therefore, you can't choose the 11th floor. You can choose a suitable classroom between the 1st and the 10th floor. Dake said decisively, Then let's go to the 10th floor. Shangmalian Academy's castle and tower were both 9-floor structures. Only the spiral clock tower had 12 floors. If the society classroom could be set on the 10th floor, it would be higher than the entire castle. When the time came, paradise could be opened in the society classroom, and the fragrance of the healing flower could be carried by the breeze to the entire castle. The three of them walked up the spiral stairs and soon arrived at the 10th floor of the clock tower. Like most tower-shaped buildings, the spiral clock tower was narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. The 12th floor only had 1 classroom. The 11th floor had 3 classrooms. The 10th floor had even more classrooms, with 6. The 6 classrooms were arranged in a circle, with a circular corridor outside and an aisle in the middle. After passing through the aisle between the classrooms, there was a circular open space that could be used as an activity area. Dake walked through the 6 classrooms one by one, gradually gaining an idea of what to do. According to Professor Shi Erfu, he could only choose one of the 6 classrooms. But in fact, because there was no precedent, no other society would compete with him for the right to use the other classrooms. This meant that in practice, even if he occupied the entire floor, no one would care. Of course, there was no shortage of people in the world who were jealous. But he was not worried about this. In short, on the surface, we still need to choose a classroom for registration. Dake ignored Professor Li Li, who had been giving suggestions, and finally chose a classroom facing the Aristocratic Academy's tower. He walked out of the classroom and looked at the Aristocratic Academy's tower, which was located on the southwest side of the castle. The view was very good. From here, he could even see the balcony of room 301. Dake immediately pinched his chin and began to ponder. If he could steadily spread the fragrance of the flowers from here to the dormitory, the magic guide sprite would be able to sleep soundly, whether it was in the society's classroom or in the dormitory. When the time came, Paradise would be placed in the society's classroom, and then a magic guide sprite would be chosen to take turns to guard the night. The overall framework would be formed. It's actually not difficult to do this. I just need to install a magic tool that can continuously blow wind in the classroom and then calibrate the direction. With the healing flower's ability to spread the fragrance, its stability can be guaranteed. When the night is over, let the fragrance spread freely and expand the coverage area as a whole. Even if it accidentally enters a corner not covered by the fragrance, it can still drink a bottle of milk to prolong its life. But if it rains, it will hinder the spread of the fragrance. This needs to be taken care of. Dake, have you thought about it? Professor Shi Erfu's voice interrupted Dake's thoughts. Dake turned his head and said, "Let's choose this classroom." "Okay then." Professor Shi Erfu said, "The moment the society card is refined, it will start recording. You need to take a picture of this classroom." As Dake listened, he suddenly felt that something was amiss. He subconsciously asked, "Professor Shi Erfu, this society's classroom. Does it have a full attendance requirement?" "Full attendance?" "Well, something like that." Professor Shi Erfu said, "The society card will automatically record each member's activity time in the classroom. Although the percentage isn't high, it will be used as a reference for the society's assessment." Dake couldn't help but ask, "Then if I set up the society's classroom on the 10th floor of the clock tower, doesn't that mean that we have to go up and down the 10th floor every day to report? How will we be able to recruit people?" "This is something that a president needs to consider," Professor Shi Erfu said gently. "Also, I think it's necessary to remind you that if a new society can't meet the most basic requirement of having 5 members within a month, it will be automatically disbanded." "Of course, I know that." Dake couldn't help but put on a bitter face. As the saying went, he would rather go without than have something substandard. He had a basic requirement for the quality of society members, but those who met the requirements might not be able to accept the trouble of climbing up the 10th floor every day. However, if he only needed 5 members, there would always be a way. He counted himself as 1, plus D. Anna and Luo C. In fact, he only needed 2 more members. Anyway, he would take a look at it during the collective recruitment next weekend. Dake took a deep breath. His eyes instantly focused, and his mind was highly concentrated. The underworld magic, which had been upgraded to the elementary level, was slightly effective. He held the society card in his hand and strode into the classroom. Standing in the middle of the classroom, he looked around and took in the entire classroom. Then, he waved his hand, and the corner of the society card lit up with a magical light. The magical light instantly spread from the corner to the entire surface of the card. The automatic circuit set up inside the society card immediately began to operate. In almost a few seconds, his mark was imprinted on the society card. The preset venue recording function was immediately activated. When a snow-white light shone from the surface of the card, Dake held it up high and scanned every corner of the classroom. Of course, he didn't forget the ground under his feet. "It's done." The light instantly disappeared. Dake put down the society card. He felt something in his heart. It was as if the entire classroom had become his territory. Professor Shi Erfu walked in from the door and said on the spot, "Do you want to try summoning a familiar?" "Of course." Dake opened his mouth and said excitedly, "There weren't many opportunities to obtain a second familiar. Each person could only have 1 academy card." Although the basic functions of the academy card and the academy card were very similar, the internal circuit was obviously different. It seemed to be more like a special venue card. The tamed demons summoned by the tamed demons were like territorial guardians or earthbound spirits. The only difference was that it wouldn't be bound by the venue. Dake was very interested in having a second little fiend magical beast. He slightly recalled the experience of using the academy card to summon the little fiend magical beast for the first time. With a trace of a sincere smile, he silently chanted the incantation of the summoning spell. "In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon the familiar." In an instant, the magic in his body flowed from his fingertips into the academy card. The academy card that had just calmed down once again released a bright light. The light was like the rising sun, illuminating the classroom. It was as bright as day and even emitted a kind of neutral and peaceful aura in the air. This was actually relatively rare among Dake's magic guide sprites. Little Li Li curiously flew over. Through the snow-white light, it stared at his face that was getting whiter and whiter. Suddenly, its cheeks turned red and it retracted its gaze. Then under Dake's feet, A thick white light was emitted. A huge summoning array floated up from the floor. The light that filled the entire classroom condensed in front of him in an instant. It consumed more magic than summoning the little fiend magical beast. The Academy Card's familiar was successfully born in the light. Professor Shi Erfu and Professor Li Li's gaze fell on the familiar that Dake had summoned. Dake himself also lowered his head to observe, squinting his eyes. The thing that he was holding in the air was a yellow dinosaur with short legs. As the main character of the first Digimon, it was the world's most popular digital beast. No one in the world could resist its temptation. Without a doubt, this was the symbol of courage, the ancient beast. Dake hid the surprise in his eyes and placed the ancient beast flat on the ground. The newborn ancient beast saw that he was about to retract his hand and subconsciously clamped his hand. Dake used his other hand to pat its head and gently said, "Don't be afraid." Only then did the ancient beast slowly release its sharp claws. It looked at Dake with an honest expression. It was a whole year apart. After the scumbag little fiend magical beast, Dake once again summoned the honest ancient beast. One was the symbol of darkness, and the other was the messenger of justice. This undoubtedly symbolized a change in temperament, and it was also a proof of growth. If it wasn't for Professor Shi Erfu and Li Li by his side, he couldn't wait to use the Great Sin card to activate its intelligence and give it a holy sword. It's a dragon familiar. Dake revealed a happy expression from the bottom of his heart. Li Li flew behind the ancient beast and looked at the back of its head. Professor Shi Erfu revealed a surprised expression. This is a 2-star familiar. Dake's heart skipped a beat, and he asked, "Can familiars have 2-star familiars?" "Yes, but very few." Professor Shi Erfu sighed. In the history of the Academy, the number of people who can summon a 2-star familiar with an Academy card or Society card is in the single digits. It seems like you need a second, curse cage. Dake said in surprise, "Can a Society's familiar be used in a magic duel?" Professor Shi Erfu smiled, "Yes, and in a Society duel, the familiar must be included in the deck." Dake nodded slightly, patted the ancient beast's head, and stored it in the Society card. Then he said, "Professor, what's the next step?" "It's all my time now," Professor Shi Erfu said. Dake pretended to be casual, and he said, "In that case, can I take over the things left behind by the Magical Animal Society?" Professor Sylph said, "I would have forgotten if you didn't mention it. Let's go back to the office." It took some time to slowly walk down from the 10th floor of the clock tower. Along the way, not only was Dake looking forward to it, but Li Li's eyes were also shining. She, Professor Didi, and Professor Ka Zayer had all joined the Academy after the war. At that time, the Magical Animal Society had been disbanded for a long time. In fact, the Magical Animal Society was no longer the Magical Animal Society after losing Peter Shelvick. Professor Shi Erfu and Principal A. Erti probably also hoped that this society that brought vitality to the Academy could be revived in the hands of Dake and Li Li. The reason why they brought Li Li was naturally because Li Li was a fairy. Peter Shelvick, as a Grand Magus who had died on the battlefield, was a household name. But very few people knew that Peter was not a pure human, but a hybrid between a human and a fairy. His hair was as clear as the sky, and his ears were only slightly longer than the average human's. His body was normal, and he had no wings. His personality was also quiet and indifferent, completely different from the naughty fairies. If one didn't know him, it would be very difficult to associate him with a hybrid fairy. And this was why he could always get the Magical Animal Society. After the three of them returned to the office, Professor Shi Erfu had Dake and Li Li wait in the office while he suddenly turned into a gust of wind and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Dake sensed where she went, and his eyes were filled with envy. Lily, on the other hand, quietly approached him. Then, she suddenly raised her hand and grabbed his hair. Like grabbing a grasshopper, she grabbed a lively little elf out of his hair. "Dake, you also have a fairy?" Li Li asked curiously. The flaming sun fairy struggled desperately between her two fingers, constantly releasing a blazing light that was like a small sun. But the little fairy completely ignored that bit of heat, and even shook it hard, making it dizzy and finally quieting down. Dake stared at the flaming sun fairy and said in surprise, "An auntie gave it to me, but it was sleeping in my hair before, right?" Gee. The flaming sun fairy seemed to have just remembered its contracted partner, and made a pleading sound to Dake. After waking up from its long slumber, it no longer had the appearance of a puppy. Thin arms and legs grew from all four sides of its body, and it looked even more adorable. Dake extended his hand in front of Li, and Li placed the flaming sun fairy on his palm. Gee. After the little thing was released, it happily rolled back and forth in Dake's palm. Its emotions seemed to be transmitted through the heat it emitted. Dake could faintly feel traces of joy in his heart. "That's great, I want one too," the little fairy said enviously. Dake smiled and said, "I heard that fairies are also a type of magical animal. Perhaps you'll have a chance after we obtain the relics left behind by the Magical Animal Society." Li immediately said, "Then I want a frost moon fairy." Dake smiled bitterly and said, "If it's a frost moon fairy, I'm afraid you'll have to go somewhere else?" Li asked curiously, "What place?" Dake shook his head. "A secret." Li suddenly laughed and said, "What secret? It must be Aurora Montifoli's hometown, right?" Dake was a bit helpless. "Why ask when you already know? Isn't this asking for a certificate?" Li said, "This year's first grade is amazing. Maybe it's even better than your second grade's average. It's been like this for 2 years in a row. I've never seen it before when I was teaching." Dake focused slightly. "But it's happened quite a few times in history. The closest to us is the Golden Generation, which ended the war." Li shook his head seriously and said, "The war won't end. Where there's wisdom, there will be war." "Wisdom?" Dake said, "I thought you'd say that where there are humans, there will be war." Li laughed and said, "War isn't exclusive to humans." The two chatted for a while. Then, Professor Shi Erfu suddenly appeared in the office like a breeze. She was holding an old cardboard box in her hands. There were a lot of broken items scattered in the box. At first glance, Doc saw one of the broken magic pens, and an ominous premonition arose in his heart. Sure enough, he heard Professor Shi Erfu say, "These are all the items left behind by the Magical Animal Society. From now on, it's yours." Dake opened his mouth and stood up to take the box. The flaming sun elf flew back into his hair, and then slowly crawled out, its 2 eyeballs agilely turning. Professor Shi Erfu looked up at the flaming sun elf and suddenly frowned. "Who woke it up early?" Dake's expression froze. He suddenly turned to look at Li. Li immediately opened his eyes wide and asked with an innocent face, "Yes, who woke it up early?" "The flaming sun elf. Gee. Professor Shi Erfu couldn't help but put his hand on his forehead. He said to Dake, "What did you feed it after it hatched?" "Well, I'm not asking you what it was. I just want you to feed it more and let it continue to sleep. It's very rare for elves to have the opportunity to evolve. Your flaming sun elf is undergoing its second evolution. This is something that can only be encountered by chance." Dake's heart moved slightly. He understood a little. "I understand. Hurry up," Professor Shi Erfu said quickly. "Once it settles down, it'll be difficult for it to continue evolving." Dake immediately said, "Then I'll be leaving first." Professor Shi Erfu waved his hand. "Go ahead." Dake picked up the cardboard box and immediately walked out of the office. Little Li's eyes turned. He suddenly turned into a small dragonfly and stopped above Dake's head. As a professor, he couldn't always follow behind a student. But after turning into a dragonfly, there was no problem at all. Professor Shi Erfu looked at the small dragonfly and shook his head helplessly. After leaving the office, Dake didn't stop at all. He practically ran back to the noble house's tower. His slightly hurried footsteps attracted many curious gazes from the others. The feathered serpent demon on the tower opened its eyes and looked at little Li on his head. It glanced at the cardboard box and then closed its eyes again. The doors to the noble house's tower opened. After Dake pushed open the door and entered, He pretended not to hear Doran and Pittan's calls and climbed up the stairs. Doran and Pittan had originally wanted to discuss the electives with Dake, but now they could only helplessly shrug. Doran said regretfully, "I wonder what he's hugging. Why is he in such a hurry?" Pittan frowned. "I think I saw something, but I'm not sure." Doran immediately asked curiously, "What is it?" Pittan hesitated. "A broken test tube." Doran. Pittan hurriedly shook his head. "How is that possible? I must be seeing things. Why would Dake be hugging a box of trash?" Dake Dimeng returned to his dorm with the box of trash. He temporarily placed the box on his desk, then immediately picked up the thinking bottle and the magic brain dropper and walked to the balcony. The magic guide fairies in the room all looked over, but none of them went to the balcony to disturb him. The milk can even stop the cat grass that was about to pounce on him with a meow. Dake opened the guardrail of the insect tree and prepared to use the magic brain dropper to extract the pride stored in one of the branches. However, the scorching sun elf on its head, who was using its hair as a blanket, suddenly flew out and grabbed the tip of the branch. It began to suck at the tip of the branch with great force. Dake could clearly feel the 1 point of pride stored in the branch quickly enter the flaming sun fairy's body. The flaming sun fairy's body also slightly expanded. After it finished sucking, it made a satisfied sound. It didn't even look at greed in the other branch. It flew back into Dake's hair as if it was drunk and gradually fell asleep. Doc heaved a sigh of relief. Professor Shi Erfu's words confirmed his guess. After the flaming sun fairy absorbed pride, it was undergoing a second transformation. When it woke up normally, it might be time for it to transform into an pride fairy. Of course, it could also be a sun fairy that was purer than the flaming sun fairy and closer to the sun god. "Hey!" Lily returned from her dragonfly form. Her eyes lit up. "I see. Then, if I can obtain an ice moon elf egg, can I also use the other soul substance you created to allow it to undergo a second metamorphosis?" "Probably," Dake said. "Then I'll reserve it in advance." Lily suddenly smiled. Pride and bliss. Sun and moon. For Lily, who often snuck into Dake's bedroom, these things on the surface weren't secrets. After Dake relaxed, he turned around and walked out of the balcony. Next, it's time for treasure hunting. 4-in-1 8000 plus. 0159/233, ding. Caught a poor author who stayed up all night to write after getting his first vaccine. My heart aches for him. Monthly votes. Blade. Chapter 546. Of course, the things left behind by the Magical Animal Society wouldn't all be trash. Dake returned to the room and closed the curtains on the balcony before lighting up the magic lamp. Seeing this, the magic guide fairies all gathered around. The little demonic beast landed on Dark's head with a smack and said happily, "Have you settled the matters of the club?" Dake took it off his head and said, "It's done." Little Fiend hurriedly said, "Then where is our society's classroom?" Dake pointed outside the window and smiled, "The 10th floor of the clock tower. I'll take you guys there to take a look. As for now, let's see what Grand Magus Peter left behind for us." Clock tower, 10th floor? Little Fiend recalled the location of the spiral clock tower. Ibrahimovic, on the other hand, shouted excitedly. Website. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. When the young cyan-eyed dragon carefully moved over, Dake brought the paper box to the middle of the room and started picking in front of all the magic guide fairies. He first took out some of the obvious junk, such as the broken magic pen, the broken test tube, the dirty cat stick, the wooden block that looked like the leg of a chair, and so on. Then he picked out some items that looked like they were the real deal. Dake said while picking, "Professor Li, did you find anything?" Professor Li leaned over the paper box and looked inside for a while, but he only shook his head with a blank expression. "Even the fairies can't tell if there's any treasure inside?" Dake smacked his lips and suddenly felt that it was very troublesome. He took a closer look and grabbed a golden chain from the cardboard box. Then, he slowly pulled out an old pocket watch the size of a palm. Principal Aerti specially gave me these things left behind by the Magical Animal Society. There's no reason for it. Doc held the pocket watch in his hand and looked at it. He said, "Look at this pocket watch. This should be the one that looks the most like it." The outer shell of the pocket watch was a bit rusty, the hands inside were no longer moving, the golden chain hanging down should be made of copper. Turning the pocket watch over, one could see something like a rune magic circle engraved on the back. But when Dake mentioned it, Lily glanced at it and said, "This is just a logo." Dake couldn't help but be speechless. "Then what about this?" He immediately picked out a key from the paper box and asked, "Could this be the key to a hidden space? It can only be triggered at the right time and place, so there's no abnormality at all." Lily stretched out 2 fingers, held the key in front of her eyes and looked at it carefully. Then she said, "It's an ordinary iron key. It's the same style as the key to the classroom door. This should be the key to the Magical Animal Society's classroom." Doc said, "Then take a look at this. This notebook is filled with mysterious words." After Lily casually threw the key to the side, she shook the corner of the notebook, and immediately shook off a lot of dust. She then flipped open the notebook and glanced at it a few times before saying, "Unfortunately, this should be a diary. The owner probably used the language of the Nisseneld clan to prevent others from peeking at his diary." "What's the Nisseneld clan?" Dake couldn't help but ask. Lily's eyes flashed. "A small clan that has been extinct for a long time. I'm afraid not many people in this era know of its existence." Dake frowned and thought for a moment, then asked, "Then who's the owner of this diary? Pyotr Shurvich? Or another member of the society?" "Let me see." Lily turned the diary back to the first page and read the name of the owner in a special language. Dake was puzzled. "Who?" Lily translated, "Ursula Springhall." Dake was curious. "Isn't she from the Nisseneld clan?" Lily shook her head. "No." Dake thought carefully. "Ursula Springhall, a name I've never heard of. Is she also a member of the Magical Zoology Society? Let me sort out my thoughts." The founder of the Magical Zoology Society was the Grand Magus Peter Shelvick, a mixed-blood fairy from the House of Fools. The second member was the Sage of the Beasts, Claire Kate. Although Claire came from the School of Magic, she was just a quiet girl who liked to read before she was in her second year. She didn't have any other talents. So when she was asked to join at least one society in her second year, Claire chose the Magical Zoology Society, which had only one member and didn't have any requirements for the member's abilities. Her initial goal was probably to find a quiet place to read. Plus, Peter Shelvick had the same hobby of reading, so they got together. Later, Claire got to know Yvette because of the escape of the fat cat, Galileo. Yvette, whose soul was hooked by Galileo, became the third member of the Magical Zoology Society. Then the fourth member. So who's the fourth member? Dake suddenly realized that his understanding of the Magical Zoology Society was still very limited. He only knew that the hero Blake God was also a member of the Magical Zoology Society, but he didn't know how he joined, or how he joined. What was the opportunity that made him join the Magical Zoology Society? Like Yvette, did he get to know Claire during the Magical Zoology Society incident, and was then pulled into the society? Then, who was the fifth member that formed the foundation of the society? Was it Ursula Springhall, the diarist? In the end, how many members were there in the Magical Zoology Society? Dake didn't know who they were and where they were now. During the holidays, he had thought of asking about this, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Claire's decadence after the end of the war had much to do with the deaths of Peter Sherwich and the others. How sad it was to bring up the past again. It was better to explore it himself. Dake looked up at Lily and said, "Maybe we can find something from Ursula Springhall's diary?" Lily blinked, picked up the notebook, closed it, and flipped it open again. She used her actions to show that she didn't want to do these troublesome things. Dake stared at her for a while, but it only made her gaze drift further and further away. Busy, just as Doc raised his head to look at the sky, the polymorph suddenly leaped towards him with the trash slime in its hand, shaking it a little. Doc stared at it for a long time, and his blocked thoughts suddenly cleared up a little. He immediately understood the meaning of the polymorphic monster. Toba, Toba, don't I have a ready-made treasure detector? With that thought in mind, Dake looked at the trash slime with a hint of joy. The trashy slime immediately jumped for joy. As long as it was useful to its master, it would be happy and satisfied. Let's start with the greedy slime eye. Dake took the trash slime from the monster's hands, took out the greedy too, and quickly activated it. As the light blue light shone on the trash slime's body, the trash slime, which originally looked like a puddle of green slime, gradually expanded in the light. It changed from slime to jelly, and the color of its body also changed from green to bluish green. Trash slime, greedy slime eye. Pew! The greedy slime eye, that was still in Dake's palm, gradually sharpened its gaze, and it followed Dake's instructions and stared at the remaining items in the box. Its only killer skill, treasure sniffing, was in effect. Pew pew! A few seconds later, the greedy slime eye jumped up with an excited look on its face. It seemed that even with Dake as a huge interference, the greedy slime eye still smelled more treasures. Dake squatted down, put it on the edge of the box, and asked further, "In this box, there are treasures?" Pew pew! The greedy slime eye nodded hard. Dake couldn't help but smile and said, "Then can you find out which one it is?" There was an abandoned magic card, a bronze trophy, 2 badges, 2 letters that were not even opened, a few bottles of magic potions that had mostly expired, dried branches and flowers, and a few abandoned magic tools that had long since lost their magic waves. After the greedy slime eye received the order, it immediately opened its eyes wide and looked inside. However, the treasure sniffing was actually a killer skill that was very general in terms of range. In an extremely small range, it couldn't make a detailed confirmation, unless every item in the box was placed at a distance. No need to go through so much trouble. Dake's mind moved, and he took out the greedy 3 from the card pack. Gurgle, gurgle. Bathed in the dark blue light, the greedy slime's body suddenly expanded, and it became a large slime with a diameter of more than 1.5 meters. In the blink of an eye, Dake was embraced by the greedy slime too into its body. It was as if he had entered a botanical garden that emitted the fragrance of plants. The filth on his body was washed away, and he felt refreshed as if he had been reborn. Poof! Professor Li suddenly plunged into the transparent slime's body and swam towards Dake's direction. Dake took the opportunity to withdraw, and he saw that she was playing dog paddling inside. Greedy slime too, using the killer skill, greedy nature. Gurgle. The greedy slime too squeezed out 2 tentacles from its body and grabbed the miscellaneous items in the box. Then, the withered tree branch was picked out from the half-full box of miscellaneous items. 2 minutes later, Dake placed the branch on the experiment table, wondering if he should cut it into pieces for research. Li, who was refreshed, looked around and asked curiously, "Can this broken branch really lead us to magical animals?" Dake said blankly, "I don't know." It wasn't that he wanted to be discouraged, but the branch in front of him didn't have any magical waves at all, and there wasn't even a single branch. No matter how he looked at it, it was an extremely ordinary branch. Li said, "Maybe it's just like what we said before, and it's a tool that will only react at the right place at the right time? Or maybe it's just a part of a secret treasure, and it needs to be assembled together to produce a reaction? Gather all 7 branches and summon the wood god dragon, right?" Dake rolled his eyes, but in his heart, he wanted to do something similar. Of course, he didn't do it. After thinking for a while, Dake suddenly picked up the branch and stood up, saying, "Let's go to the secret passage and take a look." If there was a place in the Shang Malian Academy that could find magical animals out of thin air, then it would be the secret passage. He took out the blue door card from his card bag and waved it in front of Professor Li. Even though Li didn't need the door card to enter the secret passage, he still said happily, "I know, the blue card can bring 1 more person into the secret passage, and it can only be used twice a month." Dake nodded. "That's why we don't have many chances. If possible, we should go today." Then he nodded at the magic elves, picked up the slime that had turned back into slime, and put it on his shoulder. Then he waved at the little fiend and pushed the door open. The little fiend immediately winked at the magic elves, and then hurriedly followed. A magical animal society can't just do research on paper. Even though the elves are magical animals, it's still hard for them to give people an intuitive feeling. Even if there's only one, the society needs a magical animal to keep up appearances. Not long after, Dake and Professor Li came to the entrance of the secret passage that they were most familiar with. Then he asked Li to wait for a while, and then he gently stuck the card on the wall. The wall immediately melted like water, revealing an oval entrance that could fit 2 people. When the entrance became transparent, the inside of the secret passage could be seen. Dake carefully looked inside, and then took the lead to enter. Then he stopped and thought for a while. After entering the secret passage again after 3 months, he felt that something was different, but he couldn't tell what it was. But entering the secret passage was like returning home. Just the renovation alone wasn't enough to dissuade him. Dake took a deep breath, and let the air in the secret passage flow into his nose, and then he raised the branch. It's not glowing. After little Lily also entered the secret passage, the oval-shaped entrance to the secret passage automatically closed. She stared at the branch left and right, and a disappointed expression appeared on her face. Dake was silent for a while, and then suddenly squatted down, and placed the branch vertically on the ground, and then slowly let go. That tree branch immediately fell in a certain direction, just like the legendary tree branch guidance method. However, when he used the same method again, the branch fell in a completely different direction. And so, the branch guidance method failed. When Lily asked him what he was doing, Dake had already put away the branch, and pretended that nothing had happened. The 2 walked along the passage for a while, and finally encountered the first fork. Dake didn't give up and took out the branch again, but before he used the branch guidance method again, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration, and he waved at little Lily. "You do it." Lily excitedly took the branch, and then made it completely vertical according to Dake's method, and then let go of his fingers. A mysterious and mighty force quietly emerged. The branch stood in place for half a second, and then slowly fell in a certain direction at an extremely strange speed. Dake was overjoyed when he saw this, and he knew that he had found the right method. When Lily tried the same method again, the branch pointed in a completely different direction. But this time, the branch clearly didn't have the strange solidification and slowness, and it gave off a completely different feeling. Dake's heart was as clear as a mirror. Not only did this branch need to be used by someone with the fairy bloodline, but it also had a cooldown. After finding the method, Dake and Lily couldn't help but speed up. Every once in a while, Lily would use the branch to test it, and finally determined that the cooldown of the branch should be around 15 minutes. Although it fluctuated, it wasn't much. Following the guidance of the withered branch, the 2 gradually went deeper into the secret passage. Time flew by. When it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Doc finally smelled an unusual fragrance. Since even he smelled it, Lily naturally smelled it as well. "Dake, did we find it?" She was extremely excited, and she flapped her wings in an attempt to fly forward. Dake thought for a while and took out Greed 2, and evolved the trash slime into Greed Eye. Almost at the same time the evolution was completed, Treasure Sniff from Greedy Slime Eye started to buzz like a radar. It was unusually eager to stick to Dake's ear, and shook it while hugging his ear. The direction that it pointed out was very similar to the branch that led the way. The 2 couldn't help but speed up again. A few minutes later, it was just a sudden step, but it caused the entire environment in his field of vision to change drastically. The originally flat and dry secret passage turned into a natural secret realm filled with the fragrance of flowers and plants in the blink of an eye. Dake, who was very familiar with the mechanisms of the secret passage, wasn't too surprised by this. He pulled the overly excited Lily and carefully observed the surroundings. If this secret realm had existed for a long time, and the fairy's blood and mysterious branch were the keys to enter the secret realm, in that case, it had been growing wildly for at least 20 years. Many dangers that he didn't feel before could become fatal now. Caution was the motto of an adventurer. "We're now on a cliff. Dake turned around and looked behind him. It was a cliff, and there were griffin-like scavengers circling in the air, letting out hoarse cries. He took a step back, and the scene didn't change as he expected. It was as if this secret realm could only be entered and not exited. Dake's expression changed slightly, and he looked forward. Colorful flowers grew near the cliff, and they were clustered together like a flower garden. The sky above seemed unreachable, and the continuous white clouds seemed real. A gentle breeze blew, and it had the warmth of spring. As far as the eye could see, there were forests, grasslands, and mountains. The entire secret realm's terrain was terrifyingly large, and it was even larger than Arvet's treasure trove. The colors that entered his eyes were mainly green, and there wasn't a sense of impact that all colors would rush into his retina. Instead, there was a faint sense of comfort like a spring outing. But if he felt it carefully, he would find that this subtle sense of comfort was perhaps more dangerous than the sudden explosion of bright colors. It was as if his entire will was being eaten away by this secret realm step by step. Dake suddenly woke up, and noticed that there was wood under his feet. He lifted his feet in a panic, and the wood that was wrapped around his feet was torn apart, and the wood shards flew everywhere. Even though it didn't cause any substantial damage, it was enough to make one feel frightened. If he hadn't woken up in time, his entire body would have turned into wood, and he would have become a withered old tree. Dake felt a chill at the back of his neck, and cold sweat seeped out of his back. He turned to look at Lily beside him, but he noticed that the little fairy was still looking around with excitement and curiosity on her face. She didn't notice that Dake had just escaped death. Or rather, the little fairy couldn't see the abnormal changes that had happened to him when he was standing in her field of vision. For people with fairy blood, this secret realm was a gift from nature, a place of true comfort. But for outsiders, it was full of hidden danger. Dake couldn't help but be alarmed. 2 minutes later, the little fairy, who knew that Dake had encountered something, also had a look of vigilance on her face. Then, the two of them went down the cliff and began to grope their way forward. But after half an hour of groping, Dake didn't encounter any more danger. Blooming flowers, gurgling water, quiet woods. The beautiful scenery they saw along the way was enough to make one relax their vigilance. After descending the cliff, the two of them found a river and began to walk along the river. Along the way, other than the occasional sound of insects and a few birds flying high in the sky, they did not encounter even a small animal. Even in the crystal-clear river, there were no fish to be found. Until Dake felt a little tired and stopped by the river, there was a sudden disturbance in the bushes on the other side of the river. A snow-white deer with round antlers carefully crept out, slowly strolled to the river, and lowered its head to drink water. In order not to disturb it, Dake subconsciously hid behind a tree. However, the little fairy beside him suddenly disappeared without a trace. By the time Dake realized it, Lily was already sitting on the snow-white deer's back. The deer wasn't frightened at all. Instead, it turned its head, stuck out its tongue, and gently licked the little fairy's palm, and let out an affectionate cry. As expected of a little fairy, Doc felt a little bit of envy in his heart. But just as he walked out from behind the tree, the deer suddenly let out a long cry as if it had been provoked. It turned around and fled into the bushes behind it, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Lily flew back with her hands hanging, her little mouth raised high. Dake was a little embarrassed, so he changed the topic. Is that deer a magical animal? 3 in 1 6000 plus. 0160/233. My hand hurts after the vaccine. I heard the second shot hurts even more. Chapter 547. Lily immediately showed off. That's not a fawn. It's just a little younger. Most of them are active in the Mississippi Mountains in the north and south. The locals call them fawns, which means deer that never grow up. Their antlers are as smooth as jade and naturally emit a fragrance that has medicinal value. Their fur is snow-white and flawless, and can maintain its coolness even under the scorching sun. Their hooves promote blood circulation and can be used for massage to regulate blood flow and unblock meridians. It can be said that their entire body is a treasure. But because of this, fawns are hunted in large numbers and are now on the verge of extinction. Dake seemed to understand something. He couldn't help but look in the direction where the fawns disappeared and asked, "Then, is it real or fake?" Lily crossed his fingers and said with a frown, "How should I put it? It's half real and half fake." Dake was immediately puzzled. "What do you mean?" Lily said, "You know about Grey Mist Forest, right?" Dake nodded. Of course. When he was returning home in the magic car at the end of last semester, he passed by Grey Mist Forest and was even attacked. Grey Mist Forest was shrouded in grey mist all year round, and there were many rare species that were theoretically extinct living inside. Remember the URL. M. Vipkanchu. VIP. However, those species could only survive in the grey mist and would die once they walked out. They were like illusions of life, but in the grey mist, they were like real life. Not only could they hunt and kill, but they could also grow and reproduce. However, they were essentially fake and shouldn't exist in this world. Is that fawn the same? Dake couldn't help but ask. Lily said with a rare serious expression, "It's not much different. It's the same as the soil and vegetation on this land. They're all imaginary things, but they're extremely close to reality. I'm guessing that the mystical animals here should be similar to the magic elves. They're all pseudo-life. However, if they can experience a process of resurrection, they might be able to cross the barrier between nothingness and reality. You've encountered the moon goddess statue and the vampire Vlad, so you should know this clearly." "Yes." Dake agreed. "When I was searching for the treasure left behind by my mother, I even encountered a giant dragon. However, it was ultimately a creation of magic, and its life form was not even as stable as a magic elf. Compared to that young deer, there was a qualitative difference." Lily said, "In fact, that fawn's degree of reality wasn't particularly high. If we continue to move forward, we may encounter species that are more real and have a smaller gap with real life." Dake frowned and asked, "What's authenticity?" The corners of Lily's mouth curled up, and he said proudly, "The so-called degree of reality is actually a concept proposed by combining true projection. The venue card that we usually use is the product of real projection. In the era where magic technology had yet to be invented, true projection technology had always been crowned as a miracle, the patent of the gods. Of course, now, it has become sparse and common. In short, later on, we further expanded and derived the concept of degree of reality and used it in more fields. We define things that are completely void as degree of reality 0 and real creations as degree of reality 100. In the end, we discovered that the higher the degree of reality, the harder it is to refine. Whether it's the venue card, item card, magic card, or elf card, they are all the same. Under normal circumstances, the higher the degree of reality of the venue card and magic card, the stronger the change in the situation. The higher the degree of reality of the item card and elf card, the stronger the integrity. A golden elf card, with 4 sure kill skills, has at least a degree of reality of more than 50%. This means that they are quite close to real life. The concept of degree of reality was obviously something that could only be learned in higher grades. This was extremely important for the directional refinement of magic cards. If a sorcerer wanted to stabilize and become stronger, they could not always rely on the basic refinement method. Under normal circumstances, a sorcerer who could use the random refinement method or the basic refinement method to refine 1 or 2 gold cards in their lifetime was already considered quite lucky. For example, if Dake wanted to build a blue-eyed white dragon-themed card set, he would also need to use the primordial dragon egg to conduct in-depth research on the blue-eyed white dragon community and find a way to develop the refinement formula of the blue-eyed white dragon, then conduct directional refinement. The Shang Malian Academy usually began to let students gradually come into contact with directional refinement in the 2nd year. Then, in the 3rd year, they began to guide the students on how to rely on their own research to develop a specialized refinement formula. Therefore, in the 3rd to 4th years, it was a process of accumulation. Most of the students would complete the transformation between the 3rd and 4th years. Not only could they increase the strength of the card set in one go, but there was also a high probability that they could build a complete set of systems. This was the main reason why there was a clear divide between the third and fourth years. After listening to Professor Li Li's explanation, Dake understood. From the looks of it, Peter Shelvich should indeed be a mystical animal found in this secret realm. Regardless of how he found this arcane realm or how this arcane realm was created, at least this proves that there is a magical animal whose degree of reality is infinitely close to 100% in this arcane realm. As long as the degree of reality is high enough, the difficulty of resurrection should be extremely low. Because with Peter Shelvich's ability when he founded the Magical Animal Society, it was impossible for him to complete an overly large-scale resurrection ritual. Considering that this arcane realm requires the bloodline of fairies to find and enter, the conditions for resurrection might be unbelievably low. After analyzing up to this point, Dake suddenly looked at Li Li's rosy lips with a hint of eagerness. Why are you looking at me?" After being stared at for so long, Li Li couldn't help but look away with a red face. Look again, I'll bite you," Dake hurriedly said. "I'm guessing that if there really is a magical animal whose degree of reality is infinitely close to 100% in this arcane realm, perhaps a drop of fairy blood would be enough to make it cross the barrier between nothingness and reality and become a real species." Li Li turned her head and lowered her head. Is that so?" Dake's tone became even more certain. "The possibility is very high. Otherwise, Principal A. Urti wouldn't have insisted that I choose you as the Society's instructor. Your existence is indispensable to the Magical Animal Society." "Yes, I'm indispensable." Li Li immediately raised her head, her eyes shining. However, after a moment, she suddenly realized that something was wrong, and her expression changed slightly. Dake quickly said, "Peter Shelvich is only a mixed fairy with a diluted bloodline. If he can do it, there's no reason you can't do it. Maybe in order to revive the magical animal, he needs to consume more blood." Little Fiend, who had been pretending not to exist, suddenly said, "It's better to do more than talk. Won't we know after we find it?" Dake praised, "That's right. Little Fiend, scout the way." Little Fiend, "Okay." The two didn't stay in place. Little Fiend flew in front and quickly scouted the way. Dake held Slime and quickly followed behind. Little Li Li was a free person. Not long after, they found a second magical animal. It was a magical animal that was hidden in the lush canopy. Its appearance was like a branch, but it had facial features and 4 limbs. Twig worm. Twig worms were the same as fawns. They were once common magical animals. Its situation was very similar to that of the fawns. The fawns were full of treasures. Only the bark of the twig worm was useful, but it was enough to make hunters go crazy. Its bark could change color and texture according to the types of trees around it, and it could mimic any kind of branch. After its bark was peeled off and made into camouflage clothing, the wearer could completely disappear in the forest. Therefore, it was very practical. Not only were hunters scrambling for it, but even the field troops active in the wilderness and dense forests were in great demand for it. Over time, the twig worm became an endangered species. The twig worm was a very timid magical animal, but its first reaction when it was scared was to disguise itself as a branch, instead of running away. It was to the point that people with the ability to see through could easily catch them. Therefore, when Li Li grabbed its middle with 2 fingers and pulled it out of the canopy, it still didn't move. Dake carefully observed the twig worm's appearance and asked curiously, "What's the degree of reality of this twig worm?" Li Li fiddled with the twig worm in high spirits and said casually, "About 10%, to the extent that it will disappear once it leaves the secret realm." Dake couldn't help but be surprised. This magical animal looks so real, but it only has a degree of reality of 10%? Li Li's eyes glowed white as he replied, "Appearance is the easiest to imitate. What we need to do is to see through the appearance and see the essence. Do you want to continue looking?" "Continue," Dake said decisively. Since they were already here, if they didn't turn this secret realm upside down, how could they call themselves adventurers? Oh, he wasn't an adventurer yet. Then it's fine. As the two continued to go deeper, more and more magical animals appeared in their field of vision. Dake had already summoned the magician's secretary, and ordered it to record all the magical animals they encountered along the way and draw them into a book. There was a hippo with a lotus leaf on its head, a spider monster with a human face and an arachnid body, a yellow-skinned rat that could release lightning, a round fat sheep, and so on. These magical animals all had their own characteristics. Some were very cute, and some were very useful. Unfortunately, their degree of reality wasn't high. Even if they were forcefully brought out of the secret realm, they would quickly die. Moreover, magical animals of this level couldn't be resurrected, no matter how much money was spent. According to Professor Li, a degree of reality of 60% was a threshold. If it couldn't even meet the basic requirement of a degree of reality of 60%, there was no need to talk about the follow-up. However, from what Dake saw along the way, the magical animal with the highest degree of reality was only 24%. Let's assume that this secret realm has been operating continuously before we discovered it. The number of magical animals derived from it should be far greater than when Peter Shelvick was here. Since Peter Shelvick could find magical animals that could be resurrected when he was here, there's no way we can't. Unless all the previous inferences are overturned. With this thought in mind, Dake and Li continued to go deeper. They spent more than half a day walking through rivers and plains, through lakes and forests, and finally began to climb the mountain before nightfall. If it wasn't for the training he received during the holidays, Dake wouldn't have been able to withstand such a high-intensity journey. Until now, he still maintained a relatively relaxed state. On the way up the mountain, he still had the leisure to chat with Li. The night gradually fell. Darkness accompanied the arrival of the stars. Although the night sky above their heads gave off a picture scroll feeling, there was a strange sense of rigidity. But when they looked up, it was still breathtaking. They finally stopped at the top of the mountain, hugged their knees, and looked back. Although there were endless mountains in front of them, today's journey had come to an end. Dake looked at the path they had taken with some regret. He took out the mysterious branch left by the Magical Animal Society and handed it to Professor Li. Li took the branch. The moment her fingers touched it, the space around the branch rippled slightly, as if she was in a lake. She could clearly feel that with just a slight stroke, she could draw a gap in this secret realm that would lead to the outside world. In other words, she could leave at any time. But just as she was about to move, countless fireflies suddenly rose in her field of vision. Dake's slightly closed eyes suddenly widened. The tiredness from climbing the mountain instantly disappeared. As far as the eye could see, the ground at the foot of the mountain was already silently covered with fireflies. Countless balls of light of different sizes appeared from the bottom of rivers, plains, lakes, and forests. They all floated into the sky at the same time. It was a magnificent scene that seemed to illuminate the entire world. Those who were lucky enough to see this scene were shocked to the core. However, the countless fireflies didn't continue to rise. Instead, after floating to a certain height, they suddenly gathered in the same place. As more and more fireflies gathered in the same place, a giant glowing tree with a huge canopy slowly took shape in the darkness. "Go there." Dake suddenly stood up. The flight incantation had already jumped into his fingertips. When he finished chanting the incantation and successfully took off, Professor Li grabbed his left hand and flew like the wind in the direction of the giant tree. Their fingers gradually intertwined with each other, and the same excitement appeared on their faces. The night wind quickly flowed from both sides of their bodies. Their speed kept increasing. As the distance closed, the giant glowing tree's appearance became clearer. On the trunk of the tree, which was more than 10 meters in diameter, was a huge canopy made up of withered branches without any leaves. The fireflies that flew in from all directions formed a flood of light. They continuously drilled into the giant tree, making it brighter and brighter. Closer still. Through the intertwining branches, one could see that there was a cluster of light gathered in the canopy. It looked like a fruit, but also like a bird's nest. A thought quickly flashed through Dake's mind. His fingers that were grabbed by Li couldn't help but tighten again. Then the two of them hovered in the air only 5 or 6 meters away from the giant glowing tree. Li. Dake called out in a low voice. Li Laplace was abnormally excited. It's an egg. In the canopy of the giant glowing tree, in the glowing bird's nest, an oval-shaped ball of light was shaking slightly. There was no doubt that it was an egg. Without waiting for Dake to continue speaking, Li let go of his 5 fingers and rushed toward the giant tree without hesitation. Her small and delicate body blended into the flood of light that was still gathering. Her starry eyes released a strong sense of curiosity. The moment she approached the canopy, her body suddenly twisted. Like a phantom, she passed through the dense branches and flew to the center of the canopy. She reached out and grabbed the glowing egg. 5 fingers touched. The giant tree suddenly shook. From the roots to the trunk, and then from the trunk to the branches. The strong light on the surface dimmed slightly, converging into a brighter vein. The flowing light in the veins accelerated with the glowing egg as the end point. When Li pulled the glowing egg away from the bird's nest, she pulled out countless thin and long veins. It was as if the entire tree's flowing light had been sucked dry. All the light gathered into the glowing egg. The giant tree dimmed in an instant. The fireflies that had gathered into a flood of light also became thin at some point. Only Li's smile grew wider and wider. She suddenly used her strength and tore apart all the veins of light under the glowing egg. She grabbed the egg and quickly retreated. In the blink of an eye, she had returned to Dake's side. I got it. In her excitement, she turned around to look at the giant tree. However, she could only see the blurry shape of the tree. When the glowing egg was taken away, the giant tree no longer had any meaning. It turned back into glowing fireflies and exploded in all directions. The fireflies returned to the earth. The curtain of night returned to silence. Dake and Li landed in an open space. The little demonic beast flapped its wings and rushed over. It looked curiously at the glowing egg in Li's hand. The trash slime quietly peeked its head out. Li lifted the egg slightly and said excitedly, "Look what I found? An egg with a degree of reality infinitely close to 100%. Under Dake's gaze, Li didn't hesitate to prick her finger and drip a drop of blood onto the glowing egg. The light pink fairy blood dripped onto the glowing egg and quickly spread to every corner of the glowing egg. The white light on the surface of the glowing egg quickly disappeared, revealing the glowing jade-like eggshell. It was no longer glowing, but it was more real. It was like it was a real egg. Chapter 548. Looking at the egg that was even bigger than an ostrich's egg, Dake couldn't help but reach out to touch it. He carefully felt the eggshell and was slightly shocked. After understanding the concept of reality, one would discover that the essence of magic engineering was a process of creating something from nothing, a process of turning something from illusion to reality. Creating the world, creating life. Using a body that wasn't a god, using the power of a god. This was the pinnacle of magic engineering. All magi, from the moment they summoned their first magic engineering fairy, had unquestionably stepped onto this path to godhood. The only difference was that some people couldn't advance after taking half a step, while others could advance without stopping, directly reaching godhood. I wonder if there will be a day when I can turn my magic engineering fairy into a real life form? After witnessing this miracle, Dake couldn't help but have even more expectations in his heart. The greed, in his mind, began to surge uncontrollably. However, he quickly calmed down and said to Li, "Now it seems that this entire secret realm is a ritual that exists to create this egg. Peter Shelvick's magical animals should all be obtained from this. Also, from the fact that he can bring back a magical animal every once in a while, the Arcana Realm's ability to produce eggs is still sustainable. I just don't know how long it will take for it to produce an egg. Then let's see a few more times." Li happily hugged the egg and pressed it against it. Even for her, this kind of experience was very rare. Peter Shelvick being able to rise above the rest of the Golden Generation and become a famous Grand Magus probably had a lot to do with this experience. Dake turned his head to look around and said, "Let's go out first." This mystic realm was actually not friendly to people who did not have a fairy bloodline. After Li heard this, she stretched out a hand. Dake handed over the mysterious branch. Li took the branch and waved it in a circle like a magic wand, causing the space in front of her to suddenly open up, revealing the familiar scene of the secret passage. Dake raised his foot and stepped out. The torches on both sides of the secret passage lit up with a whoosh sound, illuminating the passage. Afterwards, Li and the little fiendish magical beast also flew out in succession. Li lifted the branch again and tapped lightly. The entrance to the secret realm instantly shrank and disappeared without a trace. If it wasn't for the fact that she was still hugging a round egg in her hand, it would really make people think that what they had just experienced was just an illusion. After resting for a while, Dake had Li set up the mysterious branch on the ground again. After the mysterious branch stabilized, it slowly fell down at an extremely strange speed. The tip of the mysterious branch eventually pointed in an unknown direction. Dake pondered. It seems like the entrance to the secret realm isn't fixed. Every time we enter, we'll have to use this branch to lead the way again. That's troublesome. It's no trouble at all, Li said with a grin. Should we hatch the eggs here, or should we go out first? Dake couldn't help but ask, do you know how to hatch one? Li shook his head vigorously. I don't know. Dake then said, then let's go out first. Since this magical animal's egg had already become a real egg, if they wanted to hatch it, they first had to figure out what kind of magical animal this egg was. Every magical animal's hatching method was different, so they had to carefully distinguish between them. If the hatching was successful, it would become the new Magical Animal Society's first magical animal. After the two of them reached an agreement, they quickly went back the way they came. On the way back, the topic of conversation was basically this magical animal's egg. From the size of this egg, the magical animal that will hatch will most likely be a large species. The eggshell is as smooth as jade, snow white and flawless. It's more likely to be of the ice or light attribute. Maybe it's the legendary unicorn. The unicorn's horn is a material with extremely high medicinal value. Not only can it be used to create rare magic potions, it can also be used to create magic. And most importantly, from birth to adulthood, a unicorn will change its horn 3 times, just like how humans change their teeth. Their newly shed horn contains even more magic than a horn that was forcefully cut off. If we can hatch a unicorn, that means we can obtain 3 unicorn horns of different ages. Of course, it could also be a snow crow. Its entire body is snow white, its tongue is nimble, and it can learn thousands of languages. It's very good as a translator. But as expected, a unicorn is more exciting. Only after they left the secret room did the two of them gradually stop talking. Li tossed the egg in his hand and said, "Where do we go now? The cafeteria? The dormitory? The library?" Dake thought for a bit and said, "Let's go back to the dormitory first, but I don't want anyone else to see us." "Leave it to me then." Lily immediately took his hand and started running at top speed. Seeing them run faster and faster, the little demon quickly rushed up and grabbed Dake's shoulder. Then their bodies suddenly became transparent, and like a gust of wind, they drilled into the wall and passed through it in an instant. In the process of passing through the wall, even Dake couldn't help but close his eyes. Otherwise, he was worried that he would instinctively stop. Whoosh! The sound of the wind suddenly stopped, and something appeared under his feet. Dake suddenly opened his eyes and found that he had returned to the dormitory and was under the gaze of the magic elves. "We're finally here." The little devil beast fell from his shoulder with a thud, as if it was airsick. Then, the garbage slime that was also clinging onto Dake's shoulder softly slid down and was caught by the polymorph. "This is your harvest?" The Delu beast jumped down from the cat tree and looked at the egg. Dake smiled and said, "We'll talk about the egg later. What do you want to eat tonight?" After leaving the Duke's mansion, the food expenses of the magic elves were indeed a huge expense. But the good thing about the Shangmalian Academy was that the cafeteria was free, and they could even take it out. Dake brought the 2 magic elves to the cafeteria and brought back a pile of food. Then, they sat on the floor of the dormitory and ate together. After a simple meal, Dake picked up the magical egg again and said to Li, Next location, Claire Kate's dormitory. Lily wiped the corner of her mouth with a tissue and muttered, "Can't you wait for me to eat more?" Dake couldn't help but roll his eyes. "You're eating more than a dragon." The young blue-eyed dragon nodded vigorously to prove it. Lily stood up unwillingly. She just liked the feeling of eating with so many people. But after the Magical Zoology Society officially opened, there would be as many opportunities to eat from the same pot as this. Thinking of this, she glanced in the direction of the spiral clock tower, pulled Dake's hand again, and went through the wall. Not long after, the two went through the guardrail of the balcony and entered Claire's temporary dormitory. The room, which was originally filled with voices, suddenly became quiet. When Dake landed, Eve and Erin walked out from the shadows in the corner. "Young master, why are you here?" Eve looked curiously at Lily and the egg, puzzled. "I have something to ask Aunt Claire," Dake said with a smile. The fastest way to find out what kind of magical animal the egg was, of course, to ask, Animal Encyclopedia, Claire. After saying that, he walked into the room as if he was entering his own house. Eve and Erin wanted to say something but stopped. Dake happened to see Claire walking out of the bathroom. Claire, who had just finished bathing, only had a bath towel wrapped around her body. Her wet black hair draped over her shoulders, revealing a hint of flirtatious aura. She looked at Dake indifferently and asked, "What question do you have to ask?" Is it about this egg?" "Yes." Dake calmly looked away, not allowing himself to fall into the abyss of human hearts. "Good evening, Professor Claire." Lily followed closely and greeted her energetically. "Oh, it's little Lily." Claire nodded. "Where did you get this egg?" Lily shut his mouth and looked at Dake. Dake said frankly, "In a secret passage. Didn't I want to reopen the Magical Animal Society? It's like this." As he spoke, he recounted everything that had happened today, not concealing anything at all. Claire's emotions were still relatively stable. "So it was taken from Fairy Eden?" "I thought it would have disappeared before we graduated." Dake heard this and asked curiously, "So it disappeared before?" Claire nodded slightly and said, "Around the second half of the 6th year, Peter could no longer find Fairy Eden in the secret passage. That broken branch also lost its function." Dake was silent for a while and said, "It seems that after so many years, it has regained its function. Or maybe, Principal Aertii did something. Who knows?" Claire spread out her hands and shrugged. "Since that branch is now in your hands, it's a kind of fate. I believe that Yvette would be happy to see the Magical Animal Society reopened in your hands." The topic seemed to have become a little heavy, and the atmosphere in the room settled down slightly. Lily suddenly opened her mouth and said, "Are you done? If you're done, hurry up and see what kind of egg this is." Claire narrowed her eyes and reached out her hand. "Give it to me." She held the egg in front of her and carefully observed it. While she was observing the egg, Dake was also carefully observing her, as if he wanted to learn some methods to identify eggs. However, other than looking with her eyes and touching with her fingers, Claire only injected a little bit of magic into it and then immediately withdrew it. After repeating this a few times, she raised her head and a trace of confidence flashed in her eyes. "Seems like you've identified it?" Dake said happily. Claire nodded and said, "If I'm not wrong, this should be the egg of an Ubisoft." Ubisoft? Dake couldn't help but frown. Lily didn't hide her great disappointment. "Isn't it a unicorn?" "I was thinking..." Claire couldn't help but be taken aback. "Wait, why did you think of unicorns?" Lily blinked her big round eyes and said, "Because unicorns are white, and so are their eggs." Claire was speechless. "What you said makes sense." "I'm actually speechless." While the atmosphere was stagnant, Erin suddenly interrupted, "Reminder from the front row, unicorns are viviparous." Thus, the atmosphere became even more stagnant. In short, the egg he obtained from Fairy Eden was the egg of an uncaught bird. The legend of the Ubisoft wasn't rare, and it was even considered a magical beast and was hunted. In the eyes of most people, the boundary between magical animals and magical beasts wasn't that clear. Even though the first magical beasts were born after being demonized by the demons, they were vicious beasts without rationality. But as time passed, magical beasts reproduced generation after generation, and their blood had already mixed with the blood of other races. Most of the magical beasts now possessed the most basic rationality. Although they were still ferocious, at least they had brains. Although mystical animals were a species that existed before the birth of magical beasts, humans did not understand them in the first place. Later on, it was even more difficult to distinguish them. In short, in the eyes of ordinary humans, non-human creatures with magical powers were all magical beasts. In ancient literature, people usually defined magical species that didn't have any subjective intention of harming humans as magical animals. The only difference between them and ordinary animals was that they were more magical. Dake's specific understanding of the Ubisoft came from the book The Sage of Beasts Brings You into the Magical World, Dancing with Beasts. In this world, the Ubisoft was a type of night heron on a biological level. But compared to the normal night heron, the Ubisoft was more slender, had a longer neck, and a thin beak. It was more like a heron, and belonged to the category of large birds. Their feathers from the top of their head to the back were black, and the rest of their feathers were snow white. Flying in the night, they were like a white-clothed girl with long black hair, extremely eye-catching. And the Ubisoft was a nocturnal creature. But in fact, the biggest characteristic of the Ubisoft was that it could change into a human. In the legends, the Ubisoft was a bird with feathers and a woman without feathers. The truth of this legend was clearly recorded in the book Dancing with Beasts. In addition, the legend that the Ubisoft didn't give birth to chicks, but specifically stole the chicks of other birds and made them recognize the thief as their father was also true. Not only that, they also liked to collect nails cut off by humans and use them to predict the fortune and misfortune of humans for fun. The Ubisoft's habits were so bad. From the perspective of ordinary people, the Ubisoft wasn't a beneficial bird. This was because a small number of Ubisoft could take off their feathers and turn into human girls. They would even secretly carry human babies. But from the perspective of a mage, this was not a problem. The Ubisoft that could turn into human girls had extremely high intelligence and didn't have any language barriers. The key was that it could use its nails to predict fortune and misfortune, which could help mages seek fortune and avoid misfortune. Among them, prophets and fortune-tellers loved the Ubisoft even more. If not for the fact that the Ubisoft was rare and difficult to breed, they would have replaced crows and owls as the mage's favorite bird. If the Magical Animal Society could have a Ubisoft that sought fortune and avoided misfortune, it would be good. When it grew up, it might be able to compete with the Astrology Society for popularity. Dake took a deep breath and asked, "Then, how can the Ubisoft's eggs hatch?" Claire tapped on the egg with her finger and pondered, "The Ubisoft in nature doesn't pay attention to its own offspring, so all the eggs hatch according to fate. This makes it extremely difficult for them to breed, and they have become an endangered species." But in fact, there has always been a way to promote the hatching of the Ubisoft's eggs, and it's not difficult. Dake asked, "What's the way?" Claire's eyes curved slightly and revealed a sly smile. She said, "The way is very simple. You just need to put the egg in a swaddle and carry it with you. The Ubisoft's egg can absorb human energy, and after it hatches, it will be very close to you. Put it in a swaddle and carry it with me." Dake blinked and asked, "How many days does it take?" Claire said, "Based on the state of this egg, 2 or 3 days." After asking about all the details, Dake returned to the dormitory with the help of Li Li. Of course, he couldn't really find a swaddle and hang the egg in front of his chest. If he did, Claire would probably laugh to death. "Since the Ubisoft's egg only needs to absorb enough human energy to hatch, I just need to hold it in my arms when I'm in the dormitory. At most, I'll extend the 2 or 3 days to 5 or 6 days." Dake temporarily put the Ubisoft's egg in the kitten grass sleeping basket and covered it with a small quilt. He then continued to talk with Professor Li Li for half an hour. After he sent Li Li away, he sighed in relief. He couldn't help but take out his society card. However, after he glanced at the clock on the wall, he put down the society card, for the time being. He first drew today's great sins. According to his plan, he would choose between bliss and greed tonight. It just so happened that greed increased, so he chose greed. After he drew another drop of greed, his greed reserve reached 4 points, which was enough to refine a new greed 2. However, it would take a long time to refine using the new refining method. It was already late today, and tomorrow was the first Monday of the new semester, so it wasn't suitable for him to stay up late. Therefore, after a little consideration, he chose to postpone the refining process. Maybe after the bliss reserve reaches the standard, I can refine it with the new bliss 2. Dake pondered. In addition, the refining of the second curse cage must be put on the agenda as soon as possible. Next Friday, Traveler's Street will officially open. The necessary materials for the curse cage should be available. As for now, Dake held the society card in his hand again. In the name of Dake Dimeng, I summon the familiar. Along with the familiar fluctuation, the little demonic beast suddenly turned its head and saw a huge summoning circle appear under Dake's feet. A familiar that was strong enough to challenge its position had appeared in the summoning array. The little demonic beast almost instinctively felt a huge threat. It was a threat with a different meaning than the Dilu beast. This is a familiar? A familiar from the society. Dake didn't notice the trembling in the little demonic beast's voice. He carefully observed the yellow little dinosaur in front of him and selected pride from the 3 great sins. Then, he took out the only pride eye. First, awaken intelligence. Dake patted the sub-beast's head and used the normal summoning spell to activate Pride Eye. A dark golden ball of light with a long tail drilled out of Pride Eye and slowly floated in front of the sub-beast. It drilled into its forehead. At that moment, the sub-beast that was blinking its big eyes suddenly froze. The agility in its eyes that was originally limited to the familiar suddenly increased, and its intelligence level rapidly increased. When it suddenly closed and opened its eyes bloomed with a dark golden light. Dake, who stared at it closely, immediately tasted a trace of savagery from it. After all, it was a natural dragon species. Under the stimulation of Pride Eye, the sub-beast's wildness was obviously stimulated. Roar! It abruptly raised its head and roared at Dark. It was as if it was declaring its sovereignty over him. Compared to this, the little demonic beast's appearance when it first awakened intelligence was indeed much cuter. Dake couldn't help but squint his eyes. As if it was extremely dissatisfied that Dake didn't bow down to it, the sub-beast suddenly opened its arms and roared again. Dark patted his knee and stood up. Speak human language. Dark's breath carried a hint of sulfuric smell as he stood up. Human. As expected of a digitalized beast that was born to speak human language. When the sub-beast received the infusion of Pride Eye, although its appearance didn't change, its life form had changed from a pure tamed demon to a form closer to a digitalized beast. According to inference, it should have mastered at least one ultimate skill that a familiar couldn't master. It should be small flame, right? Dake rubbed his chin and thought. The ancient beast that was ignored once again suddenly roared. After it finished roaring, it finally spoke its inner desire. Lowly human, offer me your monthly ticket. Dake was stunned for a moment and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. As expected of an honest sub-beast. Even if its nature was changed by Pride Eye, it still only had food in its eyes. It was a pity that the dinner brought from the cafeteria had already been divided up by the magic elves. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a big deal to satisfy its small desire. However, on top of the sub-beast's head, pieces of dried meat were suddenly scattered. The sub-beast that smelled the fragrance of meat for the first time immediately took a deep breath. Then, it instinctively lowered its head and bit the meat that fell on the ground. At that moment, the sub-beast suddenly raised its head and fiercely stared at the little demonic beast in the sky. The little demonic beast's claws were holding a large piece of dried meat, and it was looking at the sub-beast as if it was looking at a bug. Then, it slowly tore the dried meat apart and scattered it. In this house, we don't need a second familiar. Just be a good dog, okay? This time, the little demonic beast kept its mouth shut and didn't say what it was thinking. However, the disdain in its eyes wasn't concealed at all. It even made people wonder who was the one that was affected by pride eye. However, although the sub-beast was slower by a beat, it still noticed that its behavior was different. After it saw the little demonic beast, it felt even more dissatisfied with the disdain and hostility in its eyes. Thus, the two-star sub-beast suddenly opened its bloody mouth and fiercely shot a ball of flame at the little demonic beast in the sky. Sure kill skill, small flame. The scorching wave of flame suddenly attacked the little demonic beast's face. The little demonic beast that usually maintained its familiar form couldn't fight back at all. However, a slightly hurried cry suddenly sounded. Layers of water appeared on top of the little demonic beast's head and fiercely poured down. Momo, when this layer of water poured down, not only did the little demonic beast become a drowned rat, but it also completely extinguished the ball of flame. The little sea lion's song had an additional layer of joy. Of course, the sub-beast that was controlled by pride also became a drowned rat. However, the ice-cold water that was contrary to its attributes seemed to have calmed it down a little. It suddenly looked around and suddenly discovered that there were nearly 20 magic elves in the surroundings, and they were all staring at it with unfriendly gazes. It had obviously become the target of everyone's criticism. However, the pride sub-beast still wouldn't lower its head because of this. It slowly turned its body, and its eyes were filled with an even stronger battle intent. Roar! It roared at all the magic elves again. Pa! However, a slap on the back of its head completely extinguished its battle intent. Dake coldly ordered, "Stop, shut up." Thus, the sub-beast straightened its back, raised its head, and puffed out its chest. Its legs were closed together, and its hands were placed on both sides of its body. However, no matter how much it struggled in its heart, it couldn't disobey its master's command. Dake took a deep breath and frowned as he looked at the large wet carpet. He coldly said, "Little demonic beast, clean the floor and dry the water. Take 5 little red flowers." Little demonic beast, asterisk, asterisk. The violent reaction of the sub-beast dispelled Dake's idea of trying Great Sin 2 and Great Sin 3 indoors. Maybe we should wait until the new curse cage is made before we do the experiment? Otherwise, even if it evolves, we won't be able to get any direct data. Also, the sub-beast's evolution is most likely to be a huge Tyrannosaurus, so it's not suitable to evolve indoors. Let's leave it at that for now. After finalizing the plan, Dake patiently waited for more than 10 minutes. Seeing that the sub-beast's eyes had regained its clarity again, he took back the order of punishment. The sub-beast that could finally speak after regaining its consciousness said, "Sorry, Dake." It touched the back of its head and looked like it was sincerely remorseful, which immediately changed the bad initial impression that the magic elves had of it. Dake smiled and said, "Did you notice that your brain has become more flexible?" The sub-beast suddenly realized that it seemed to have become smarter after being reminded. It quickly turned from worry to joy, and it was very excited. Dake pursed his lips and said, "Go, get to know your brothers and sisters." "Okay, Dake." The sub-beast turned around and saw the little demon that was drying the carpet. It suddenly asked, "Is your jerky delicious?" The little demon looked up and saw the sub-beast's greedy face that was almost drooling. It suddenly felt how stupid its previous behavior was. Wait. So it flew to the cabinet, took out its precious jerky, and handed it to the sub-beast. The sub-beast's eyes lit up, and it couldn't wait to take the jerky. Wah! It took a bite. Suddenly, its mouth was filled with the aroma of the meat, and its entire dragon body melted. "Jerky, so good. Little demon, so good." Slurp! The young blue-eyed dragon forcibly sucked back the saliva dripping from the corner of its mouth. It realized that this new dragon cub might be able to become good friends with it. Seeing that the little foodie was gradually integrating into the group, Dake was slightly relieved. He went into the bathroom to wash up, and then got into bed to practice the Underworld God spell, to further consolidate and strengthen it. He only needed to ask Professor Ka Zayer to learn the next stage of the Underworld God spell. Therefore, Dake wasn't in a hurry before he completely consolidated it. After half an hour of daily meditation, he closed his eyes and fell asleep. When he woke up again, it was already the morning of September 3rd. He didn't know what happened last night. The sub-beast and the little demon were lying on the corner of his bed, while the other magic elves were sleeping on their own beds. But this wasn't a long-term plan. There were no beds for the oversized young blue-eyed dragon and lion. It was urgent to develop and build a club classroom. Dake rubbed his temples, got up, washed up, put on a facial mask, and then went out to exercise. If he didn't improve his physical training, he would fall behind. Instead, he felt that the practice of the chakra could be delayed. After he came back from his morning exercise, breakfast and newspapers were already placed on the desk. After Dake finished his breakfast, he was full of energy. He took out the branch card and opened the class schedule. The class schedule for the second year was very different from the first year. First, Magical Beasts was officially changed to a major course. Astronomy was no longer taught, but there were corresponding branch elective courses. Then, there was a new major course, Magic Language. The other major courses didn't change. They were still Summoning, Magic Introduction, Potionology, Dueling, Magic History, and Mathematics. But there were 2 major courses a week in the past, but now there was only 1 class left. The temporary class schedule was as follows. Although this arrangement left more free time for the students, the corresponding basic credits that could be obtained in class were almost halved. Even if the 2 elective courses from the second week were added, it couldn't be completely made up. But the basic credits that could be obtained from attending classes seriously were originally a kind of guarantee. If the students wanted to obtain enough credits for the second year, they couldn't rely on such a guarantee. They had to perform well in class, complete more homework, accept dungeon adventure missions, win in duel competitions, obtain more credits from the guild, or fight fair duels and trade fair to earn more credits. The simplest and safest method was to join a club. If they performed well in a club, they would be able to obtain resources from the club. Normally, clubs would give preferential treatment to the new second-year students. A good club would also provide various guidance, such as how to obtain credits quickly in dungeon adventures. After the students entered the second year, they would face a completely different life from the first year. But these things weren't shown on the first day of school. The first lesson for the second year of the aristocrat house was the summoning class taught by Shi Erfu. Dake didn't go to the classroom early. Instead, he spent some time in the dormitory to browse through the contents of the summoning textbook. The most basic, normal summoning, and sacrificial summoning had been taught in the first year. After the second year, although the content would continue, it would be more about guiding the students on how to improve themselves. Other than that, the other summoning spells weren't purely summoning incantations. Regardless of whether it was fusion summoning or ritual summoning, they had to be paired with corresponding magic conducting cards. Especially, fusion summoning. As fusion was very difficult to create, the second year would only teach the relevant theories and not the application. There were many similar types of summoning spells. In other words, the second year's summoning class is mainly about theories. Dake flipped through the book before closing it. The second lesson on Monday morning was Magical Introduction, as usual. Besides the theoretical knowledge related to magic conducting, the Magical Introduction would gradually teach the method of targeted cultivation. Dake was very interested in this content. He put the summoning and magical introduction textbooks into his bag and walked to the classroom. When he arrived at the classroom, the large lecture hall was already filled with people. The first summoning class of the new semester was taught by Professor Shi Erfu. She temporarily swapped the summoning and magical introduction classes for the School of Magic and the School of Fools. This allowed the School of Magic and the School of Fools to reach an agreement with the School of Aristocrats and the School of Knights. This way, the 4 schools could have classes at the same time. Dake looked around and went to his usual seat in the last row by the window. Although the seating arrangement hadn't been fixed, the students had a tacit understanding after an entire year of first years. Dake walked past White and Luo Boat and went to his usual seat. He stuffed his bag into the drawer and sat down. The second-year students were more excited than he thought. The classroom was very noisy. The second year had just started, and the School of Knights and the School of Aristocrats were already arguing. Everyone was full of energy. When Dake took out the summoning textbook from his bag, Anna suddenly turned her head. Her red face was full of excitement. Dake looked at her in confusion. He wanted to ask her if something good happened, but she suddenly said, Dake, have you looked at the class schedule? We only have half of last year's classes. Dake, so you didn't look at the class schedule before? After a while, he smiled and said, This is indeed a good thing. 4. 5 in 1, 9,000 plus. 0163/233, it's the end of the month. Guys, vote. It'll be a waste if you don't vote. Chapter 549. Only half of the classes meant that more than half of the assignments and tasks were given. Wasn't this a good thing? Of course it was. Dake echoed Anna while looking at the students he hadn't seen for a long time. Humans, especially those in their teenage years, grew at an astonishing rate. The difference between hard work and not hard work would also be very obvious. After the 3-month holiday, most of the students' mental outlook had changed greatly. And those who stayed in place would probably have a hard time catching up in the following academic life. Ding-ling-ling. Professor Sarah Shi Erfu walked into the classroom with the bell, and the noisy students suddenly quieted down. In an instant, only the sound of Professor Shi Erfu's footsteps could be heard in the classroom. She walked up to the podium and said to the audience, Hello, students. In the blink of an eye, we have known each other for more than a year. This year, I will still be in charge of your summoning class. Let's start the roll call. https://m Vipkanchu VIP AI Marmatis. Here. Dake Dimming. Here. Anna Gretbel. Here. When the roll call was over, Professor Sylph went through the things that they needed to pay attention to when they started school one by one. As the deputy dean of the Shang Malian Academy, she had always played the role of coordinator in the second year, similar to the head of the year, and such things had always been handled by her. She first finished talking about the school rules, then mentioned the school championship competition again. At the end of the school year, the School of Magic successfully broke the monopoly of the School of Aristocrats and won the school championship competition. At that time, the first-year students of the School of Magic were also lucky enough to have the opportunity to make a wish to the Holy Grail. They remembered that the greedy have nothing, and most of them gain something. This made the students of the other 3 schools envious. Now that Professor Shi Erfu mentioned it again, the atmosphere was explosive. Especially the School of Aristocrats and the School of Knights, their eyes were filled with fighting spirit as they looked at the School of Magic. The first years couldn't intervene in the school championship competition, and could only watch the senior students try their best and lose. But now, they were already second years. Regardless of whether it was the dungeon tournament or the duel tournament, they would be held at different levels. They would have the initiative to win. Professor Shi Erfu observed the students' reactions and clapped his hands in satisfaction. The purpose of the academy setting up the school championship competition was to arouse the competitiveness of the students, and it was obvious that the goal had been achieved. Then, she softened her tone and began to explain one of the 2 most important contents of today's class: elective selection. From year 2 onwards, every student has to choose 1 or 2 elective courses to study. This is very important for your final exam. With each additional elective course, your total score will be higher. If you can complete an elective course in the first semester and get the approval of the professor, you can choose another elective course in the second semester. Regarding the name, content, and requirements of the elective course, I will distribute the complete form later. If you really can't make up your mind, you can also discuss it with me. You have to make a decision before the end of this Friday. The latest submission time is 6 p.m. on Friday. I'll be waiting in the office. In addition, I have to remind you that the maximum number of applicants for each elective course is 30, and the minimum number of applicants is 10. If it's too popular, there's a probability that the professors will open another elective course with the same content, but it's not certain. So, after considering it, submit it as soon as possible. If the final number of applicants for an elective course is less than 10, it will be considered disbanded, and the applicants will have to choose another elective course. In short, the whole process is generally like this. I hope that you can consider it thoroughly when choosing an elective course. After that, Professor Sylph handed out the form she had brought and added after that, "Yes, Professor Sylph. In addition to considering popular or unpopular courses, when choosing an elective course, you have to pay attention to choosing the one that suits you the most and not the most popular one." After receiving the form, Dake skimmed through it quickly and found that the form was slightly different from the one in his hand. He guessed that it had been adjusted. However, Professor Ka Zayer's alchemy course and Professor Midya's astrology course had not changed. He thought about it and filled in the names of these two elective courses on the elective course application form. Astrology course might not be as popular because it required a divination talent. However, Professor Ka Zayer had always had a good reputation, and he was one of the few remaining master alchemists in the world. His alchemy course would probably be full in an instant. With a limit of 30 people, he had to sign up as soon as possible. In addition, D. Anna's night course was also very popular. It was very popular among the night students. However, the transformation course had a high threshold. Considering that the application would be rejected if it didn't meet the requirements, not many people would choose the transformation course. Also, there was a transformation course every year. Most of the senior students who were interested in it should have already taken it. Dake actually wanted to take the transformation course, but it could only be used as a backup. If he couldn't squeeze into Professor Ka Zayer's alchemy course, then he would have to settle for the second best and choose the transformation course. As for Luo Si, she should be able to get into astrology course. However, the other medical course she was planning to take was a bit dangerous. Although Sister Ka Lien didn't have a good reputation, everyone in Shang Malian Academy trusted her medical skills. This was the first time she was offering an elective course. There would probably be people from the 2nd grade to the 6th grade who would want to sign up. Anyone who was interested in medicine would not want to miss Sister Ka Lien's medical class. Have you thought about it? After Dake finished writing the application form, he quietly tapped on Luo Si in the front row. Luo Si was a bit shocked. She whispered, "It's still astrology course and medical course. What about you?" Dake turned to D. Anna and asked. D. Anna blinked and said, "Of course it's night course and transformation course." "Okay." Dake responded and said, "Then let's wait until this class is over and submit the application form." The advantage of getting the elective course form in advance was shown. Very few people could decide on their elective course without discussing it with others in such a short time. After Dake confirmed the application form, he couldn't help but think of Eve and Irene. I wonder if they've made their choice? Professor Shi Erfu gave the 2nd grade magisters about 10 minutes to look at the application form. Then, he changed the topic to another important topic of the day. In addition to the elective course, there are also clubs that need to be confirmed this week. The Academy doesn't have any mandatory rules for students to join clubs. However, club activities will be an indispensable part of the Academy. Whether it's interpersonal relationships or club resources, they will bring you extra benefits. My personal suggestion is to join a club that you're interested in. It will be a way to expand your abilities. The collective recruitment period for clubs will start on Friday and will end on Sunday. In addition, the recruitment window for the Duel Club will also be open for you. The first recruitment of this semester will be held this Friday afternoon for 3 consecutive weeks. Students who haven't joined the Duel Club yet need to prepare as soon as possible. Although Professor Shi Erfu emphasized the importance of joining a club, he didn't mention too much about the club information. Just as he said, he hoped that the students could choose a club based on their interests instead of blindly squeezing into a large club. The rest of the class was filled with questions from the students and answers from Professor Shi Erfu. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of the class. Ding-ling-ling. After answering the last question, Professor Shi Erfu reminded the junior magisters to submit the application form for the elective course as soon as possible and prepared to leave the classroom. However, as soon as she stepped down from the podium, Ai Ma Métis, who was sitting in the first row, stopped her in her tracks. Professor Shi Erfu. The little girl with fluffy brown hair greeted politely and handed over the application form in her hand. Professor Shi Erfu glanced at the application form and was a little surprised. "You've chosen already?" Ai Ma smiled slightly. "Yes, Professor. This isn't a difficult choice. Let me see." Professor Shi Erfu took the application form and saw that it was clearly written alchemy and astrology. She asked, "Is this your choice? You don't have a chance to change it before it's rejected." Ai Ma said confidently, "This is it." "All right then." Professor Shi Erfu put away the application form. Then, she gave up on the idea of leaving the classroom and returned to the podium, placing the textbook back on the table. Then, Saraswati stepped onto the podium and handed the application form in her hand to Professor Shi Erfu with a smile. This brown-skinned girl from the Sorcerer Academy had a mysterious aura after her 3-month vacation. Professor Shi Erfu took her application form and looked at it carefully. He frowned slightly. "Alchemy and astrology?" "Yes, Professor." Sarah smiled. "I want to learn more about ancient alchemy." Then, she turned her head to look at Ai Ma and asked, "Little Ai Ma also chose alchemy and astrology?" Professor Shi Erfu nodded. "It's nothing to hide." Sarah said, "It's just as I guessed. Alchemy is the source of magical technology, so it's bound to be very popular. She has the same talent for divination as me, so Professor Midya's astrology is a good choice." After saying that, she stepped back slightly and let Dake, who was a little late, walk to Professor Shi Erfu's side. Dake didn't expect that his opportunity would be taken away from him. When he walked over, he also heard the conversation between the two, and he felt a little strange in his heart. When he handed over his application form, Professor Shi Erfu also felt helpless. All three of them chose alchemy and astrology, respectively. Although alchemy course was unique, there were 3 teachers who taught astrology course. However, all 3 of them chose astrology course, taught by Professor Midya. Without waiting for her to say anything, Eudora, who ran over with Papa, also stuffed the application form over. She looked at the application form with alchemy and astrology and couldn't help but take a breath. It wasn't until Luo Si and D. Anna's application forms were also submitted that her helplessness was slightly diluted. At least Luo Si and D. Anna had other electives. The speed of Dake and others' actions surprised the little mage. But there were only a few people who were as decisive as them. Although Doran Teddy wanted to follow Dake's footsteps, in the end, he still rationally stopped. Doran didn't have the talent for divination, but his close friend Pitan had the talent for divination. Among the 9 stars that Professor Midya chose at the beginning of the last semester, one of them was Pitan. In addition, Sarah, Ai Ma, Eudora, and Luo Si were also people with a talent for divination. In addition to them, there was Luo Boat, Sarah's close friend Heidi, another student from the House of Fools, and little Ivan. If nothing unexpected happened, these 9 stars would all sign up for Professor Midya's astrology class. With these 9 people, Professor Midya's astrology class only needed one more person to start. It was just that Luo Boat didn't have Vlad's possession, so who knew if he still had the talent for divination? Even Dake was only Ivan's proxy. The person who actually taught the class was actually little Ivan. At least that was what he thought. The break between the first class and the second class was only half an hour. Professor Shi Erfu only stayed in the classroom for 10 more minutes. In addition to Dake and the others, there were a few people who hurriedly handed in their application forms. However, White, Luo Boat, Doran, and Pitan were still hesitating. Professor Shi Erfu stood up and said, "Okay, if you want to submit your application, you can directly send it to my office. Even if I'm not here, I'll make sure someone is inside." After she finished speaking, she left the classroom without looking back. The tense atmosphere in the classroom finally relaxed. Luo Boat Broheim was the first to shout, "Really, How can you decide in such a short time? White, have you decided? White Gouda also had a worried expression. Other than the night class, I haven't thought of anything else. What about you? Luo Boat suddenly said bitterly, the night class is also one of the subjects I want to learn. The other one is the astrology class, but I haven't thought of it yet. Tell me, do I really have the talent for divination? White slightly frowned and thought for a while. You should, right? Didn't you see it? Luo Boat covered his head, but after thinking about it carefully, I feel like I didn't see it. Also, in the astronomy class, I didn't really understand what they were talking about. Is the astrology class really suitable for me? White couldn't help but pat his increasingly strong arms and sighed, maybe the astrology class really isn't suitable for you. Why don't you ask Professor Midya before making a decision? That's true. Luo Boat cheered up. I can't choose an elective that I can't learn. Speaking of which, after ending the conversation with Luo Boat, White suddenly said, Dake and AI Ma both chose the alchemy class and the astrology class, right? Luo Boat said without blinking, Dake probably chose the astrology class for his magic elf. As for the alchemy class, I'm already having a hard time learning the magic introduction class, so I don't dare to choose randomly. However, after pausing for half a second, White suddenly said, I want to choose the alchemy class, what do you think? The second class of the semester was Professor Ka Zayer's magic introduction class. Professor Ka Zayer, who came to the classroom 2 minutes early, suddenly found that he seemed to have become a hot steamed bun. A large number of students had been staring at him since he entered the classroom. Professor Ka Zayer suddenly remembered this until someone came to ask him about it. He simply asked the student to leave and waved his magic wand as he stood up. Ding-ling-ling. The bell of the class interrupted everyone's thoughts. Professor Ka Zayer simply waited until the bell disappeared, then he held the podium and said, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. About the elective class that I plan to open, the alchemy class, as the name suggests, is a class that teaches the knowledge of alchemy. Because of various reasons, you may have developed an extra interest in alchemy. But in fact, alchemy is just an old technology that's being eliminated. Here, I hope you can understand very clearly. The magic technology that we are learning is based on the foundation of alchemy. It's alchemy that's beyond ordinary alchemy. If you want to improve your magic technology by learning alchemy, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. It won't greatly improve your magic technology, but it will give you a little more understanding of the origin of magic technology. So, if you want to improve your magic technology by choosing the alchemy class, please be careful. Professor Ka Zayer's speech could be said to be words of persuasion. But his charisma made people want to choose the alchemy class more. Alchemy followed a very strict principle of equivalent exchange. Whether it was breadth or depth, it had been surpassed by magic technology. Learning alchemy was like learning horsemanship in modern times. It was a thing that lacked practical significance, unless students had other purposes for learning alchemy. For example, Saraswati wanted to learn more about ancient alchemy to make up for her lack of knowledge in this area. And AI Ma Mortis wanted to use this opportunity to deepen her research on ancient alchemy and crack the secret of the Gold King. The set of murals that she and Dake obtained in the secret passage had now encountered a research bottleneck. As for Dake Dimeng, he just wanted to learn how to make some alchemy tools. But in fact, most students didn't think so clearly when choosing an elective class. Most of them would think, this is interesting, I like this might be helpful to me, and then choose. If the professor in charge of this elective class was the one who liked it, then it was basically confirmed. Therefore, after this class, many second-year students put the alchemy class in the 2 electives they wanted. This situation didn't change until shortly after the potions class in the afternoon ended. Suddenly, someone sent a message that the alchemy class was full. The limit of 30 students was simply too little when compared to the 5 grades of the academy. In fact, after noon, the alchemy class was already full. When the potions class ended, some people's applications were rejected and they had to choose again. There were less than 10 second-year students who successfully squeezed into the alchemy class. The same thing happened in the night lesson. The enthusiasm of the Night Academy students for the night cultivation class was beyond imagination. Almost every Night Academy student wanted to take the night class as one of their electives. As a result, several Night Academy students wrote night class and alchemy class on their application forms. The most typical example was White Gouda. In order to accompany Luo Boat to find Professor Midya for consultation, he was late in submitting his application form. He only applied for the night class and was rejected for the alchemy class. After losing his alchemy class qualification, Victor clenched his teeth and chose Transfiguration class, one of Robert's other elective classes other than night class. Transfiguration class was an elective class taught by their professor, Pawa Cheong-si. It was natural for them to have a preference. Moreover, if they could transform into a lion or tiger at a crucial moment, it would obviously greatly increase the safety of a magician. Especially when adventuring in the dungeon, it could help a magician escape from many dangers. However, the threshold for the Transfiguration class was higher, and Luo Boat's application was likely to be rejected. After the 3 lessons on Monday, Dake brought the magic elves to the spiral clock tower to clean up the club classroom. He treated the entire 10th floor as the club's activity area and spent a lot of time cleaning it up. The accumulated dust and sewage were flushed into the sewers. The air in the club classroom was refreshed by the fragrance of the healing flower after he tried to open Paradise. He could only wait until Traveler's Street was officially open for renovations. He would customize the walls, furniture, and other items. Dake dragged his exhausted body to Claire's dormitory and expressed his concern about the twins' elective class. On the other hand, Eve and Erin had finalized the elective plan yesterday. With Claire's help, they submitted it to the higher-ups and it had already been approved. In contrast, Dake was the one who was concerned about. After shaking off Claire's pestering and returning to the dormitory, Dake realized that Aurora was already sitting inside. The elves squinted their eyes as they enjoyed the supper brought by Aurora. They were all very intimate with her. Dake smacked his lips, sat down, and asked Aurora about her studies today. He mainly wanted to know if Victoria and Phoenix could adapt to the Academy's teaching environment. Aurora, on the other hand, immediately understood what he meant. However, as a first-year student of the Noble Academy, she was basically in the same classroom as the Knight Academy. She would only be in the same classroom as the Mage Academy and the Fool's Academy on rare occasions. Therefore, she could only tell Dake about Phoenix's situation. How should I put it? Even though Phoenix doesn't like to talk, she isn't bullied because she's from the Dimming family. On the contrary, she's rather favored. The professors take good care of her and always ask her to answer questions. Answer questions? Dake blinked and asked, "Did she answer the questions?" "I was worried at first, too." Aurora smiled. "But she's more knowledgeable than expected. It should be thanks to Sage Cyrus and Ms. Plant." Dake said with relief, "In that case, she should have earned a lot of credits, right?" Aurora nodded. "Yes, and she's very serious in class. She's a good kid." "Is that so?" "That's good," Dake said. "Then, what about the familiar? There should be a summoning class in your class schedule today, right? What kind of familiar did she summon?" "Wait, let me guess. Could it be the Phoenix?" "Not far from it," Aurora said gently. "She summoned a fire elemental chick." Dake was a little surprised. "A chick?" Aurora nodded. "Yes, it's a round, fire-red chick the size of a palm." Then she gestured twice above her head and said, "There are 2 fire feathers here." Dake asked, "Is she satisfied?" Aurora thought for a moment and said, "She should be quite satisfied, right? I saw her carrying the familiar on her head." Dake could not help but wipe his forehead. "Does she think her hair is a bird's nest? What about Victoria? Did you meet her in the cafeteria at noon?" "Yes," Aurora said with a smile. "I wanted to have lunch with her, but I saw that she was getting along well with 2 of her classmates, so I didn't go." Dake pondered. "It seems that she has made friends?" Aurora said, "Probably. Victoria's personality is so good. She must be very likable." "I hope so." Dake shook his head and muttered, "It would be great if she was in the aristocratic compound." Aurora watched quietly. By the way, Dake said again, Joey, John, Anna, and Enchi? Let me think. Aurora touched her chin and thought carefully. After a while, she said thoughtfully, Anna and Enchi are very active. Joey and I sit at the same table. As for John, I didn't see them. Dake naturally knew what she meant by active. However, it was not easy for the two little princesses to not cause trouble for him after entering the school for so long. As for Joey and John, although he promised their parents that he would take care of them, he had to wait for them to adapt for a while, right? Maybe the two siblings could work hard without needing him to take care of them? Thinking of this, Dake asked with concern, What about you? Do you need me to take a look at your familiar? Aurora's gaze immediately turned to Dake's magic elves. Her eyes suddenly lit up and she said excitedly, Can I? Of course. Dark smiled and said, A smart familiar can bring us great convenience in the Academy's life. And it is also our best companion. Aurora nodded and quickly took out her school card from her card bag and began to summon. When she was in the Duke's mansion, she had done the usual summoning training under Dake's guidance, so the summoning was not slow at first. As the rays of light converged, her familiar was summoned from the school card. It was a puppy with a snow-white body, with only a tuft of red hair on its forehead. Dake felt the aura of both ice and fire attributes on its body at the same time and could not help but be surprised. Ice and fire mutually restrained each other. It was extremely rare for a creature to have these two attributes at the same time. Woof! After the round-headed puppy appeared, it circled around Aurora's feet. Then, it accidentally bumped into her calf and sat on the ground with a plop. Dake reached out and picked it up. Looking at the pink ball of meat, he asked, What's its name? Aurora saw that her familiar did not even have the courage to struggle and her cheeks were slightly red. It's called Icefire Hound. Dake thought for a while and took out Pride Eye to activate its intelligence. The Icefire Hound that was infused with pride finally had a little courage, but in the hands of Dake's tempered eagle, it could only whimper and submit. When the effect of pride was over, Dake returned the Icefire Hound to Aurora. Aurora quickly hugged it and stared at its eyes for a long time. The eyes were the window to the soul. From their gazes, she knew very well that her familiar had become different. After all, Dake was only a second-year student. He had his own studies and research, so it was difficult for him to take care of other branches. With Aurora providing information, it would indeed bring him a lot of convenience. He expressed his gratitude to Aurora and asked the little demon to help bring back the cutlery used for supper. Then, he pondered. The start of Victoria and Phoenix's school was much smoother than he had imagined. The Dimming surname brought them convenience in all aspects. But at the same time, it would also attract some so-called friends who were not sincere. However, these were all part of life experiences. Dake would try his best not to interfere. In the first year, Victoria and Phoenix needed to work hard, adapt, and improve. He would not provide any credits for him either. He did not have high expectations for these two magic elves. He would not be like a certain king who blurted out that he was the chief. As long as Victoria and Phoenix could pass the Duel Club's recruitment at the beginning of the next school year, he would be very satisfied. In short, he was looking forward to it. That night, Dake relied on the bliss that he obtained from Claire last night to complete the bliss draw for the day. Then, it ushered in the next day. On Tuesday, the second-year classes of the Noble Academy were Mathematics, History of Magic, and Warcraft. The professor of the History of Magic was still Ryan Hux. He seemed to have successfully passed the examination of the Academy and became an official professor. The professor of Warcraft was naturally the diligent Professor Nini. As for Mathematics, the textbook for Mathematics 2 did not seem to be completed as quickly as Professor Lely had imagined. The second-year Little Magisters only had 2 pages of materials and passed the first mathematics lesson of the new semester. 4-in-1 8,000 plus. Ah, it's another all-nighter day. Where are the monthly votes of the Yen Zoo's people? Oh, hashtag 165/233 You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.